The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, hello, good evening. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back for another episode of Hayes Reviews in which we read books and we do it live and we gather some knowledge and we take time to investigate what is going on in the world by connecting with the great minds of the past who took the trouble to commit what they had learned and researched into word format onto the pages of paper, squashed together and glued together on the spine, created into a book and preserved out here into the future. So it's a wonderful thing to be here, to be doing this, and I'm very grateful to have you tuning in tonight. If you're watching live, welcome, and if you're watching on the replay, also welcome to you too. And don't forget that there will be a pinned comment underneath the video where you can go. If you want to jump ahead to the reading, there'll be timestamps in that pinned comment. Make use of those to get to the juicy bits. We are currently, we've actually finished the book. We finished Fearful Master. We wrapped that up the video before last, part whatever that was, 7 maybe. And we're continuing with these bonus episodes because when I bought that copy of the book, it came with all these extra leaflets and pamphlets, which gave further pieces of evidence and further contextual information regarding Ed Griffin's thesis in his book, The Fearful Master, which is that the UN is not what it appears to be. It is not what we are told. It has shady origins. It has sympathies and leanings with socialism and international communism. And if you know your history, you know where that leads. The people pushing these systems and these ideologies and these methodologies of running economies and societies and communities, they keep pushing it despite the fact that it tends to lead to overwhelming amounts of pain, death, suffering, and starvation. Yet, it's that gift that keeps on giving. It never goes away. And even today, in this day and age, you meet people who walk around calling themselves communists, trying to advocate for a more centralized, top-down, authoritarian system of control over everything, because that's what communism is. It is technocracy. It is atheistic, scientific, materialistic control of every aspect of your life by an unaccountable bureaucracy that is bloated and incomprehensibly complicated, Kafkaesque in every way, shape, or form, and things don't get done unless you know who to pay, which wheels to grease, whose palms to fill with cash, and that's if you've got any cash, because these days cash is getting harder and harder to come by. In the future, I'm not quite sure what we're going to bribe our bureaucratic representatives with. Maybe matchsticks or cigarettes if we're allowed those, perhaps some homegrown potatoes if we're allowed to grow them, but only using Monsanto seeds, of course. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where we're going. I don't know where it's heading, but exciting times to be alive. And I think we stand a better chance of understanding where things are going and preparing ourselves for these events if we look at the historical precedent, what came before, what is the origin of these organizations such as the UN. And so, as I mentioned, we're doing these bonus episodes to read through some of the extra material which came with my copy of the book, and there was loads of it. There was a bunch of different leaflets and pamphlets. This is just some of them. all sorts of different things written by a variety of authors as well. So what we did on the last live stream was we jumped into and began reading this, which is 46 Angry Men, and it's documenting the UNO violations, the UNO being, it's this side, UNO being United Nations Organization. It used to be known as the UNO. It used to be known as number one, UNO. Now it's just the UN, they dropped the O. But the UNO violations in Katanga back in the 1960s, a correction I should make as well is that multiple times throughout this video series, I've referred to Katanga as a city. It is not a city. It is a province. Okay. So please go back and scrub your memories of the times I got it wrong and, just memory hole those mistakes I made and overwrite them 1984 style with the correct information. And we'll just pretend that I never made such a ridiculous gaffe. But yeah, Katanga is a province, and the city in question, or the cities in question that we learned about in The Fearful Master are Elizabethville, as well as some others as well. But that's the name that sticks in my memory because it's an English name, and we have queens and whatnot bearing that name, and it's easier for me to remember than the African names of other places, which are a little trickier. But we started with the 46 Angry Men, and this is after the UNO, as it was then known, went into the province of Katanga, and they just started indiscriminately murdering people, peaceful people, doctors, nurses, volunteers, people working for the Red Cross. They were just getting massacred brutally and inhumanely and mercilessly. And the first part of this pamphlet that we started reading was detailing those incidences, giving the names and giving the circumstances which... the circumstances under which they were killed by UNO forces, mostly Ethiopian so far that we've read. And so tonight we're going to carry on reading this pamphlet, and we're going to dive into a couple of the other leaflets as well that came with this bundle of historical information that I got, right? So that's what we're here to do. I'm very happy to have in the chat, we've got Turbs over on Rumble, we've got Enfuego, Anti-Coviet's back, Celine Lyon and Johnny Fogg. Also, we've got, I thought I saw someone else here. Frank, there you are, on YouTube. So thank you all for being here. And Odyssey's quiet at the minute, but that's all right. No problem. There's nothing is compulsory here. You don't have to participate. You don't have to comment. Although, if you would like, share, comment, and subscribe, that would help very much because that makes the numbers on the screen go up. And when the numbers on the screen go up, I feel good inside, all warm and fuzzy. You know what it's all about. If you grew up playing computer games like I did, getting a high score and watching the numbers go up, or I don't know, maybe before the computer game era, maybe you were into pinball, maybe you were on the pinball machines watching, because you got some really high numbers on the pinball machines. Oh boy, you could get into the 6-figure, 7, 8, 9-figure digits on the pinball machines, so it's all about making the numbers go up. And if you are willing and able and you like what we do and you enjoy being part of it, I would very much appreciate clicking those little buttons. And you must know how to do it by now. You've spent time on YouTube and Rumble and all these platforms for long enough, right? Gwen's just hopped into the chat as well. Good evening, Gwen. So that's the plan for this evening. I'm not sure if we'll go for our usual full sort of 3-hour running time, but we've definitely got enough material to read to go for that long. So I've put aside a couple of the shorter extracts and leaflets to go through first before we get into the 46 Angry Men. Just a word of warning as well before we get into that, the 46 Angry Men document. It is kind of grim. It's very sobering. The accounts of the way in which people were murdered are not easy reading. Okay, but I feel like it's very important to get it on the record, to honor the people. Their names are mentioned in full. Their ages, quite often they were late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s. So they were young people. They had a lot of life ahead of them. They were volunteering, trying to do a good thing, trying to help those less fortunate than themselves. Sometimes we get born into good situations and we try and make up for that by helping other people who are less fortunate than ourselves. And that is a very good way to live your life, right? And it is really saddening and upsetting to read about people doing just that, getting mowed down by machine gun fire and experiencing all these kind of horrific deaths. Okay, so word of warning, it is grim reading. And there's also some pictures. They're all black and white, but some of them are kind of gory. So if you're squeamish, I'll give you some warning when there's a picture coming up, and I'll put it on the camera, I'll show it, but we'll cover it up and not dwell on these pictures for too much. But again, this is history. It's not about delighting in the gory details and having some sort of voyeuristic satisfaction of bearing witness to these things. It's more about recognizing and understanding what is being done. What are these organizations really about when the velvet glove comes off and the iron fist is revealed? What are the methodologies? What are the crimes that have occurred which people have not been held to account for? And we know, I'm sure, in this audience, there are many of those. There are many crimes that have been committed, particularly over just the last 4 years alone, even though this is back in the 60s, but just in the last 4 years, many crimes have been committed. Do any of us really hope there's going to be some sort of comeuppance, some sort of actual justice being served to the people who perpetrated these crimes? Or are they going to carry on getting wealthy, getting lofty positions and titles in institutes and think tanks and corporations, in that revolving door at the top of the pyramid where they hop from one board to another board, making money, making insider deals, trading, knowing what's going to happen, knowing what the plan is, always betting on the right horse and playing the market so well, because they're geniuses. They're just so good at investments, right? Well, no, it's because they know what's coming and they're manipulating it and they're positioning themselves to benefit, because these are the people with their hands on the levers of power. And the more you serve them and the more you do what you are told, the more insight and information you are given about what is to come. And therefore you are more able to position yourself in a way to benefit from it. That's the way the world really works, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry to break it to you. Those of us here who are on the outside of that little club that we are not in, we have to kind of not guess, but we can look at the evidence and we can look at the historical precedent, and we can follow in the footsteps of fantastic analysts and thinkers and journalists such as G. Edward Griffin to read the trail of breadcrumbs that he has left behind in order to get a sense of what is coming, and in order to get a sense of the true nature of these organizations that our governments in many cases have committed us to without our consent, with no recourse for breaking that agreement. In The Fearful Master, Ed Griffin tells us about these treaties that are signed by our governments, which supersede the laws made within our countries. He's talking from a very USA-centric point of view, being that he's American, but this applies to all the countries that have signed up to the UN. And as we learned in the first video of this series, that's pretty much all of them. And yes, the UN is a kind of a paper tiger in that it doesn't really have any enforcement agency to make sure that the agreements are upheld yet. That doesn't change the fact that it has got nearly 100% of the world's nation states signed up to this organization now. It doesn't change the fact that it approaches local councils and local governments to get its plans enacted and pushed through by way of steering committees and the Delphi technique, where you can have a community meeting at your town hall and they say, do you want this to happen to your town? Which version of this would you like, 1, 2, or 3? And you're not allowed to say, well, I don't want any of those. That's not allowed, because the outcome of these meetings is pre-decided and they are constructed in such a way that your town and your area and your city is going to experience sustainable development no matter what, because that has been decided above, outside, and beyond the realm of voting, of having an influence, of writing a letter to your MP. They're making agreements on our behalf without our consent, without our informed consent, which makes them illegitimate, means they do not deserve our support. They do not deserve our anything apart from disdain, I would say at this point. So to understand how these kind of things work and how they roll out and how they're always done in the name of benefiting everyone, the greater good, they always care about the world's, everybody in the world. It needs to be fair for everybody, and all the animals as well. The animals and the humans, they're equal. You know, the humans are not more valuable than the animals, and in fact, the animals are more valuable than the humans in many cases. Look, how good are dogs? Dogs are amazing. Don't you think we should kill off a few million humans to save a few more dogs, right? It's this kind of thinking where the environment and the plants and the animals, they get an equal, if not greater footing than the humans. And then we need to suffer and have drastic cuts to our quality of life, to our opportunities, to our options, to our material well-being, to our material wealth, because we got to protect the environment and the animals. And that is a fair point. There is a lot of toxic, poisonous stuff done to the environment that should not be happening. But is it us? Is it you and I driving our cars around to get to work and back? Is it you and I eating steak? You know, is it us who are given no option but to buy products which fail and break all the time, products which are wrapped in toxic plastic, products which are sprayed with chemicals, products which are made with horrific man-made industrial processes? You know, we don't have an option but to do that because of the economic systems we live in, the financial systems we live in. Yet we are the ones who are supposed to be blamed, who are the bad guys. The enemy of man is humanity itself, as the Club of Rome told us back in 1991 when they published their book, The First Global Revolution. I'm just glancing over there because I have a copy over there somewhere, but it's on one of those piles of books. So that is what we're doing. That's why we're reading this stuff. We're getting an insight into these organizations because this is hidden history, I think. This is occulted history. It's not very well advertised when you're in school and you're being told about how wonderful the United Nations is, how it's our last best hope for world peace. They don't tell you that they went into Katanga, into Elizabethville, and massacred a bunch of people, and 46 doctors, civilian doctors who witnessed this massacre, who witnessed this indiscriminate murder, wrote testimony and recorded it and sent it to the president of the USA at the time and to other world leaders, to the Pope even, I think, to condemn this organization. That part of the history is kind of, we'll just leave that bit out. Don't mention that bit. I didn't even know Katanga. I didn't even know the place Katanga existed until we started reading Fearful Master. I hadn't heard about it before. Plenty of characters as well in this story that I hadn't heard of, including Lumumba and Tshombe, and who was the Irish guy? I've got his book over there as well. I forget the Irish delegate who was sent over to oversee and smooth things out. So there's a lot of history here, a lot of names, places, a lot of anecdotes, and I think we are on the right path, trying to learn and get to grips and get familiar with these occurrences. Remember, I was saying as well, one of the things to remember, because it's a lot to remember, one of the things to remember that came out of this is Operation Rum Punch. If you just want to take away 3 words that you can throw into conversation or bring up with people whenever the topic of the UN comes up, it's Operation Rum Punch, because that is the operation which led to the murders and the slaughter of these innocent Red Cross workers that we're going to be reading about later on. Okay, Operation Rum Punch. Remember that. And thank you, Frank. It was Connor Cruz O'Brien, who was the Irish fella whose name I forgot. Yeah, I knew it was a triple barrel name. I knew it had 3 parts to it, but that's about as far as I got. So thank you for swooping in there and providing me that detail. I appreciate it. And that is what it's all about. That is why it's nice to have people watching, tuning in live, helping me remember details that my stupid brain can't remember, but also helping me look up words. New words. We find new words occasionally and we look them up and we learn together, and we get to throw around ideas and have a good back and forth when we're all participating in this together. So it's not really just me chucking out information and audio into your ear holes. It's also you out there as well, sending something back my way, and then we can all make it edifying and useful and beneficial as a group, as a team, as a community. I don't know what you can call it. Call it whatever you will, but it works and it's good. So awesome. We got a lively chat over on YouTube, and I can't read all of this out, but you look like you're all getting on very nicely, which is good. And I'm happy to see that. So I'll have a sip and then we'll get on with our reading. Someone was asking me where I live. I live in the northwest of England at the moment, but I'm moving house very soon. Ashley Styles is here. Good evening. Had a good chat with Ashley last night. We had a good hour going back and forth. Awesome. Okay, so I'll show you what I've got first. We'll go over to the book cam and we will get on with today's this is what we're here for, isn't it? So I got 3 pamphlets to get through first. They're pretty short, but I picked these out because they're short. And I'm not sure whether tonight will be the last live stream in the Fearful Master series, or if we'll do one more, because we've got a couple of other booklets that I think would be good to get on the record. But the 3 that I've picked for tonight to kick off the live stream are, as you can see here, zoom in a little bit. So we've got The Truth About UNICEF. This is from an article in DuPont magazine, 1971. We've got The Genocide Treaty, which is another one down here. This is from the New York Times, 1971, same year. And then we've also got Communists Control the UN. And these are all by the same writer, William Dunham. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he is associated with American Opinion. American Opinion, I think, is the publishing house or the shop that supports G. Edward Griffin and put together this bundle of informational material, which I was lucky to find a copy of on eBay. And so these are the 3 that we're going to go through tonight. So I thought we would start with Communists Control the UN, because that's been a really key theme of the Fearful Master book, is how communist sympathizers were instrumental in setting up the UN and organizing it and planning it. People who were either openly communist or were later admitted to be communists, or they were accused of being communist and they refused to incriminate themselves, so they didn't show up for their their trial. There was also, Ed Griffin was telling us about, there was influential positions within the UN that have always been filled by people from communist countries and communist regimes, which is quite interesting as well. So this ties in very nicely to our reading of Fabian Freeway, which is on the Rumble, YouTube, and Odyssey channels on the playlist tab. You can find that. Incredible book, very well referenced. Tells you about Fabian socialism, tells you about how the socialists and the communists are the same. But the communists believe in a violent revolution that happens very quickly and transforms things rapidly. And the socialists say, well, chopping heads off and all that, fine. But what we could do instead is play the long game and infiltrate and permeate and penetrate groups and parties and political organizations and change them from within. And you got to play the long game. You got to play the game of winning the hearts and the minds. And in the case of socialism, communism, I think it's very easy to do, because you just preach fairness and you preach we need to make things better for the common working man and woman, right? Don't you want a better life and better conditions and better material, And part of the success and the brilliance of this plan is that they actually did that. They actually did bring some meaningful, beneficial changes to the way people were exploited through the mechanism of paid employment, right? You take away their ability to be self-employed and self-sustaining and start their own business, and then then they become employees, and then they're at the mercy of the people who are paying their bills and setting their paying their wages and setting their working conditions, right? So the Fabian socialists did bring in some changes that were beneficial and for the working man, the average working man and woman in the street. But that was part and parcel of a much longer, broader term plan, which would ultimately lead to kind of where we're at now, what we're facing now, which is this complete, total digital data gathering, data-driven AI software dystopian nightmare where everything is controlled and computer says no. And if computer says no, you're shit out of luck. I'll give you okay, before we get into this, I'll give you a real world example. Okay. Today we had to transfer some money from our bank account. I said me and my wife, transfer some money from our bank account to another bank account. And it was more money than you're allowed to transfer using online banking. Okay. So we had to go into the branch and we had a limited time. We were at work and we're like, right, we'll go in the bank on the way home. So boom, we went to the bank, closed. Okay, we'll find another one. Where is it? All right, it's over here. Get in the car, drive 25 minutes. We get to the bank. There's 20 minutes left, right? before the bank shuts. And we walk in and we say, we want to transfer this amount of money. We've got the invoice here, and it's going over there. And you say, oh no, well, you can't do that. We haven't got enough time. Like you've got, there's 20 minutes left, and all we're doing is changing the digits on the screen for this account and the digits on the screen for that account. It's an instantaneous electronic thing that should happen like that and can happen like that. It's not like, oh, we got to go in, open the vault, count the gold bars, weigh them, make sure they're right, package them properly, stick them on in a van, drive it over to the next bank, deposit it, do the same process in reverse. No, nothing like that. It's an instantaneous, press a button and it's done. Oh, sorry, we can't get that done in 20 minutes. You have to come first thing in the morning. It's going to take a lot longer than 20 minutes. And this is just the perfect example, because we've got to do checks because of money laundering. Because we've got to protect you from all, there's all this money laundering and fraud going around, right? You see, don't you know? It's for your benefit, your protection, your safety, that we can't let you spend your money when you need to. So computer says no, anti-COVID, just nailed it. Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're heading into. And my point in mentioning all that is that has always been the end game. The end game has always been this, but they just didn't have the technology back then, the data gathering, digital technology, the connectivity of the internet back when they first rolled out communism, the first places and times they tried rolling it out. They had to keep tabs of things on like pen and paper, I suppose, and that wasn't quite as efficient. And then IBM did come along and they came up with their punch card machines, which were used in the Second World War by the Nazis. And the whole book about that is IBM and the Holocaust. I did review that on this channel, so I'll give a little punt of my book review of IBM and the Holocaust. That's a 2-hour book review because it's quite a chunky book. So that technology came along and that allowed for the categorization and the processing of data on a level that had hitherto was unknown. But now we're at another level. We've hit another precipice now, and they now have that ability to collect the data and gather it and crunch the numbers, and for an algorithm to spit out an answer, and for you to have no recourse to a human being. So the humanness has been taken out of it anymore. You can't say, well, look, me and my wife work. I appreciate that you got to go home in 20 minutes, but can you not stay here for another 15 minutes to just see this through, because we really need it to get done today, and we went to the other branch, and it's just like, well, it can't be done. It can't be done. Because the computer says no. So there's no appeal now. There's no personalization. There's no human touch. There's no bending the rules a little bit and showing a bit of kindness and a bit of understanding and a bit of empathy for extenuating circumstances, or for somebody who is in a pickle, right, or in a jam. It's just computer says no. What can you do about it? Sorry. And that's been the end goal for a long time. But in order to get us there, they had to do things that benefited us. I'm talking back about the Fabian socialists again now. They had to do some things that benefited us because they had to convince us that they were on our side, and that they did care about the working people, and they did care about working conditions and workers' rights and all this sort of thing, right? But at the same time, they've exported all production out of our countries and over to China. So the only jobs that are left are meaningless pixel pushing or service industry jobs, which is, shows how much they care about the average worker and the average, working family trying to make a living and make ends meet and improve things for themselves. We got CS Mally on CS Mally 369 just popped into Rumble chat. Good evening. I'm glad you made it. I'm sure I spotted somebody else just pop in. Christine got here as well on YouTube. Hello. And LJ as well. You got here just in time. I haven't started the reading yet. I've just been rambling. Okay, so that's a bit of rambling. And just in case you doubt for 1 second, I've got to show you this. Just in case you doubt for 1 second that communism and technocracy is all the same thing, I just got this through today from America. The only copy of it that I could find online. This is from, I believe it's from 1933. Check that out. That's Technocracy and Marxism. William Z. Foster, Earl Browder. And it's got a speech as well by V.M. Molotov. He was pretty high up in the Communist International. This is I believe it's 1933. It's just a 33 page pamphlet, but just the fact that it's called Technocracy and Marxism, because I learned about technocracy as one thing over here, and then I started learning about communism and Marxism as another thing over here, and then I read the Fabian Freeway, and I'm like, oh, it's all the same thing, because it's all centralized control of everything. That's technocracy, that's Marxism, that's communism, and that's what socialism is trying to bring about stepwise in a gradual way. Okay. Good evening, ESP. Just popped into the Odyssey chat. So I just thought, yeah, that's quite an exciting little artifact we've got there that we'll have to read on the stream at some point. I was very happy when that one turned up today. Okay, cool. Let's get into our first reading of the evening. This is Communists Control the UN. By William E. Dunham. This is from a speech by Secretary of State William P. Rogers on October the 4th, 1971. There's a quote. "The United Nations is an important instrument of peace. Building a structure of peace means that differences exist and will continue to exist. One of the functions of a structure of peace is to protect and accommodate those differences, not to destroy them." Correction. So I guess this quote here is from the Secretary of State, and then this is William E. Dunham's comments underneath where he says correction, and he's setting him straight. So this is kind of praising the United Nations, saying, no, the United Nations, it just wants peace, but it will protect the differences of everybody. Honest, differences are really important. We have to be inclusive and tolerant of everybody, except the people who hate inclusivity and are intolerant. Don't be tolerant of the intolerant people. Doesn't that make you intolerant then? Wait, shut up. You're thinking about it too much. Anyway, this is, I think this is William E. Dunham's correction. So, Secretary Rogers displays an appalling willingness to let the international communist conspiracy continue to use the United Nations as a basic weapon in its drive to enslave the world. That the United Nations is an integral part of communist strategy was stated by Joseph Stalin in 1942 in his book Marxism and the National Question, where he wrote that the world should be divided into regional groups as a transitional stage to world government. Then, the regional groups would be brought into a single world dictatorship. Later, on March the 23rd, 1946, Pravda quoted Stalin as having declared, quote, "I attribute great importance to UNO, since it is a serious instrument for preservation of peace and international security." End quote. Political Affairs is the theoretical organ of the Communist Party, USA. In April 1945, 2 months before the San Francisco conference at which the UN was formally created, that journal told its readers, quote, "Great popular support and enthusiasm for the United Nations policies should be built up, well organized, and fully articulate. The opposition must be rendered so impotent that it will be unable to gather any significant support in the Senate against the United Nations Charter and the treaties which will follow." End quote. As Earl Browder, former General Secretary of the Communist Party USA and twice its candidate for President of the United States, wrote in his book Victory and After, quote, "The American communists worked energetically and tirelessly to lay the foundations for the United Nations, which we were sure would come into existence," end quote. And I'll just mention there as well, I'm sure the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed that this name, Earl Browder, is familiar from a few seconds ago when we looked at this, which was written by Earl Browder, Technocracy and Marxism. So Earl Browder, the former General Secretary of the Communist Party USA there. Just how tirelessly the comrades worked to build this, quote, "instrument of peace" was exposed in a study conducted in 1954 by the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. In a report entitled Activities of United States Citizens Employed by the United Nations, the subcommittee revealed, quote, In our investigations of United States citizens employed by the United Nations, we found considerable evidence to indicate that communists used the same techniques in infiltrating the UN Secretariat as had previously been used in infiltrating the United States government. Some of these persons exposed in our government investigation played key roles in the actual establishment of UN's specialized agencies. Key roles is an accurate phrase. 4 years earlier, in 1950, the State Department issued a volume entitled Post-War Foreign Policy Preparations 1939 to 1945, which listed as important US government figures in UN planning Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White, Virginius Frank Coe, Noel Field, Lawrence Duggan, Henry J. Wadley, John Carter Vincent, David Weintraub, Nathan G. Silvermaster, Harold Glasser, Victor Perlow, Irving Kaplan, Solomon Adler, Abraham G. Silverman, William L. Ullman, and William H. Taylor. All 16 were later identified in sworn testimony as secret communist agents. Communist manipulation of the American delegation at the founding conference was so thorough that identified communist Dalton Trumbo actually wrote the report to the nation delivered at that conference by Secretary of State Edward R. Stettinius. Were the communists successful in constructing a vehicle which they could use in their drive to enslave the world? G. Edward Griffin points out in his book The Fearful Master, A Second Look at the United Nations, that, quote, one of the most important positions within the entire United Nations, if not the most important, is that of Undersecretary for Political and Security Council Affairs. Since the UN was created 26 years ago, 10 different men have held that post, and all 10 of them have been communists. Consider also the observation by W. Cleon Skousen in his excellent text, The Naked Communist. Quote, anyone familiar with the Communist Constitution of Russia will recognize in the United Nations Charter a similar format. It is characterized by a fervent declaration of democratic principles which are sound and desirable. This is then followed by a constitutional restriction or procedural limitation which completely nullifies the principles just announced. Rather than being an instrument of peace, in the sense in which Americans generally use the phrase, the United Nations is still an integral part of communist plans. New Times is an English-language magazine published weekly in Moscow. In its issue for July the 8th, 1970, its communist editors observed, quote, as stressed by Premier Kosygin at a luncheon for U-Tant in Moscow on June 19th, the Soviet Union attaches much importance to the United Nations. In future, as in the past, it will spare no effort to steer the organization's work, end quote. Of course not. It was UN Secretary-General U-Tant, who is a Marxist, who declared in April of 1970 that Lenin's, quote, ideals of peace and peaceful coexistence, meaning no resistance to communism, are in line with the aims of the UN Charter. Yet Secretary Rogers says the United States should, quote, protect and accommodate the communists under the United Nations. Responsible Americans, however, want to get us out. There you are. And so this is an article, and you can get, well, back in the 1964, you could get 50 copies of this for $1. What a bargain. Leave them on the bus and put them through your neighbor's letterboxes. So that's a really good summary, actually, just that 2-pager there of some of the key takeaways. And I think when I was just sort of revisiting that and going over it, I was thinking about how it is strange that two sides of an apparent conflict would both support and be enthusiastic about the UN, right? Because you've got the sort of liberal democracy under capitalism against the communist system of the Soviets. And yet both sides of this apparently sort of, again, it's another kind of blue-red spell You know, they always do the blue-red spell to divide people and get you into this us and them tribal mentality. Are you the blue team or the red team? Which one? Pick one. And the other people are the bad guys, and you're the good guys. And never mentioning that both people on both sides in both teams believe that they're the good guys. And so it always comes down to a conflict between two groups of people who both believe they're the good guys. So it's good guys against good guys every time. And that's one thing to bear in mind when these divide and conquer tactics are being rolled out against us, is that it's always good guys against good guys. Funny that, isn't it? So that's kind of one aspect to consider, how enthusiastic Lenin was for the UN and how aligned with the Soviet, what is it called? The Soviet, it's not the manifesto, is it? The Soviet Constitution is very similar to the United Nations Charter. The Communist Constitution of Russia. Okay, that's what they refer to it. So the Communist Constitution of Russia is very similar to the United Nations Charter. And if you compared those two with, for example, the Constitution of the United States, that would be a really good exercise to see what is left out and what is gotten rid of. And as we learned in the early videos of Fabian Freeway, when I was reading up about communism via Wikipedia, it positions itself very much against individual rights, against marriage and family, entrepreneurism, private ownership, and Christianity more broadly, right? And you'll notice that the UN Charter is devoid really of any kind of spiritual or religious or acknowledgement of any kind of higher power or anything to deal with that whole dimension of reality. It doesn't touch upon it, maybe for a very good reason, but, you know, people think that atheism is rational and sensible, and those stupid, superstitious God believers are all murderous maniacs. But history kind of, especially of the 20th century, suggests the opposite is true. You know, how many people died at the hands of the atheistic ideology and known as communism, right? Huge numbers, massive amounts. Oh, I'm on mute. Sorry, how long was I on mute? You're just all sitting in the chat talking about weather, aren't you? All right. Sorry about that. I don't know how long I was on mute for then either. I'm back. Yeah, I was just saying that the that two-pager article that we just went through was a good summary because it contains some of the key points that we learned about in the book. And it's nice to read after going through the book, because then we can refresh our memories of these key takeaways, these kind of hot takes that we want to grab hold of, commit to memory, and have them ready to toss out into conversations and discussions with other people, right? So that's all I was saying. And then I noticed that you're all in the chat talking about the weather and just had a giggle about that. So let's get on to the next one, which is by the same author. This was in the New York Times, and it's by the same author, two-pager again. This one's The Genocide Treaty. Okay, so it starts again with a quote, and then he gives his correction underneath. So the quote is, "The Senate Foreign Relations Committee today approved the 22-year-old United Nations Genocide Treaty, making it an international crime to attempt the destruction of entire national, ethnic, racial or religious groups. The vote was 10-4. And William Dunham says, correction. 7 of the above 10 senators, Democrats Fulbright, Church, Symington, Pell and McGee, plus Republicans Case and Javits, had tried unsuccessfully last fall to get the Senate to act on this same genocide treaty. This time, they are joined by Democrats Muskie and Spong and Republican Hugh Scott. In both instances, their acts paralleled well-known directives of the international communist conspiracy." More shocking is the fact that even the prestige of the White House was used to force the treaty out of committee. On February 19, 1970, President Richard Nixon sent a special message to the US Senate urging it to ratify the Genocide Treaty. It's worth noting that Mr. Nixon's position on this issue has changed markedly over the years. On May 3, 1951, Congressman Richard Nixon declared, quote, "The major objection to the treaty is that its provisions would not apply to the persecution of political minorities in the Soviet Union. In addition, the treaty in its present form grants far more power to the international organization, the UN, than the United States should agree to. You can be sure that in view of these objectionable features, I shall continue to oppose the Genocide Treaty in its present form." End quote. The treaty has not changed, though apparently Mr. Nixon has. The late Frank E. Holman, a former president of the American Bar Association, made this analysis of the Genocide Treaty. Quote, "What is genocide? Translated into simple Anglo-Saxon, it means race killing. It goes without saying that all decent men and women are opposed to any program, official or otherwise, which contemplates the destruction of a racial group in whole or in part. But out of this generality of the term genocide, a whole new class of individual crimes is to be created. Acts are made punishable, which are not only purely domestic in character, but public officials, as well as private citizens, are to be made amenable to international tribunals for a variety of ill-defined and ambiguous so-called acts of genocide, to the extent that the causing of mental harm to a member of a group or complicity in doing so is an act of genocide." End quote. Attorney George A. Finch, editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Law, noted in that learned periodical as far back as January of 1950, quote, "The Genocide Convention is an outstanding example of an international agreement upon which the public has been and is being misinformed. As genocide is defined in the Convention, it does not apply to the mass killings and destruction of peoples by totalitarian governments, but it appeases such governments by making it possible for them to continue, as they are doing today behind the Iron Curtain. The monstrous treatment of thousands of human beings whom these government regards as enemies. There is not a word in the Convention which denounces as genocide the mass killings and destruction of peoples by governments." End quote. Curiously, this latest vote by the Fulbright Committee was revealed the day after announcement of the verdict against Lieutenant William Calley, a verdict which has deeply disturbed many Americans. In this connection, please note carefully the observations of distinguished legal experts Ori L. Phillips and Eberhard Deutsch, both of whom have, for many years, served on the American Bar Association's Committee on Peace and Law through United Nations. Messrs. Phillips and Deutsch prepared an article for the November 1970 issue of the DAR magazine from which we quote, "The authorities in Hanoi have charged that members of the armed forces of the United States have been guilty of genocide in, quote, the alleged massacre of civilians of a South Vietnamese village. If the United States were a party to the Genocide Convention, she would necessarily have agreed that these soldiers are subject to trial in Vietnam under the provisions of Article 6. That country would cite the convention, if we were a party to it, as our consent to the trial of those prisoners on genocide charges in that country, with the Nuremberg trials as a sanctioning precedent." End quote. What a fiendish way for Senator Fulbright and the liberals of his committee to seek to resolve the POW problem which is causing them so much political embarrassment. They would confirm the Genocide Treaty and have our soldiers in enemy prisons tried in North Vietnam as war criminals. Communist support for the Genocide Convention has been greatly increased over the past few months. Instructions were spelled out in the September 1970 issue of Political Affairs, the theoretical journal of the Communist Party USA. In a 3-page editorial, it points out that the Communist Party has been charging the United States with genocide since 1951. Then the Political Affairs editorial ends with this directive. Quote, every communist and progressive, every reader of political affairs should be fully involved in this campaign. What sort of progressives are the 10 senators who recently voted for the Genocide Convention? Ask the wives and families of our men in enemy prisons who may be tried by the communists as war criminals if the Genocide Treaty passes the Senate. So it'd be good to have a copy of the Genocide Treaty and understand exactly what it was that was being discussed there. A lot of the time, this reminds me of what they did over the last 4 years by changing the meanings and the definitions of certain words. The injection, the word for injections being one of those. The word for people's pantomime being another one. The definitions were changed and messed with, and suddenly you have that thing without having that thing, right? And this is a really key critical way that the magic spells are cast upon people. And it's done by updating and changing the definitions of things without notifying everyone. It's never on the news, is it? It's never an announcement. Oh, by the way, everybody, we've changed the meaning of this word now. So bear that in mind when you're going about your business and talking to each other, the meaning of that word has changed, like a public service announcement. You know, they never do that. They never tell. They just change it quietly, and then they'll roll out some new legislation or some new law and sign it off, and then it'll be totally impossible to understand what it is that they want to do with that law because you are unaware that they've changed the meaning and the definition of a word a year or two before they passed the law. And then suddenly you're unable to communicate meaningfully because you're having two different sets of grammar, right? If you take the trivium method of learning, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, you've got to come to terms and agree on the definitions of the words you're using. That's stage one. That's before you put together some arguments and you have an exchange of ideas in order to come to a mutual understanding, hopefully to find some truth through your interaction and your discussion and your exchange of ideas, right? They're messing with that very fundamental first step of approaching truth, the grammar stage, by muddying the waters with different definitions and dictionary entries, changing the meaning of words that are extremely familiar and commonplace to us. They change it and they don't tell you that. And that sounds like the kind of thing that was going on here as well. Like, okay, well, what is genocide? What does it mean? What are you referring to when you say that? What is the Genocide Treaty? How does this treaty define genocide in a way that enables governments to carry on murdering indiscriminately whole groups and racial ethnicities or whatever as without being caught under the confines of this treaty, if that makes sense. I think I just waffled nonsense there. Apologies. But I think you know what I'm getting at. Celine Lyon says, exactly, this is first principles. Yeah, exactly. So that's it. So they mess with the words, they mess with the meanings, they don't tell you they've done that, and then they pass some treaty or some law, and you say, hang on a sec, you said in that treaty over there that you wouldn't genocide all these people over there, and they're like, that's what we're doing over there is not actually genocide. If you look, the definition of genocide changed 2 years ago, so that's not genocide. Don't worry about that. That's fine. That's fine. We're good. We're not breaking the treaty. It's all good. We can do that over there. So it's an absolute scam. It's a con. It's a scam. It's conology, as Alan Watt likes to say. And it's manipulative and it's evil because it messes with people's ability to discern and understand what is true, what is real, what is actual and factual, as Richard Grove likes to say. And that's what that whole article kind of reminds me of. That sort of legalistic arguing over the meanings of words and wiggling your way out of things by saying, oh, well, technically you didn't say, you didn't say not to do that. It's a really childish thing. It's like primary school level, isn't it? When you have that naughty but fairly smart child in the class who can find loopholes in things that people say and get away with stuff and fight back and argue back and be really mouthy because they're using logic and loopholes, and the teacher's just like, just do what I say and shut up. You know what I mean, right? And Fuego is saying, grammar's such an issue nowadays. I have had friends become very agitated when I ask them to define their terms. They have no idea how to do it. It blows my mind. Exactly, yeah, that's it. That's spot on. And you ask, okay, and you say to people, all right, look, let's have this conversation about whatever contentious topic it is, or it might be. But before we do, let's just agree, let's define this word and whatever it is. I'm not going to throw out a load of words because it might shadow ban me or whatever. But whatever contentious topic it is, it might be the injections, it might be the L downs, it might be the pretty patterns in the sky, whatever it is. You can say to people, you can have a conversation about it, but before you do, you got to say, right, we need to agree on a definition of this thing first. Because if we can't agree on a definition of the thing we're talking about, then the conversation is never going to go anywhere. We're just going to be spinning our wheels, misunderstanding each other, getting frustrated and aggravated. But this is the problem, is we haven't been trained from a young age while we're in school to define our terms. We've been trained instead to just kind of assume and be comfortable with vague insinuations of meaning that aren't concrete and aren't solid. And we're not taught, unless you're in like a debating society or something, the average schooling that we receive is not going to tell you, look, before you talk about anything, you got to define your terms and agree on definitions of the words you're using. Otherwise you're going to, and this is why that one habit alone, if you could bake that into everybody's communication, would change the world. That one habit on its own, it would prevent so much miscommunication and frustration and anger and upset and hurt feelings and all that other stuff. If you just paused at the beginning and said, okay, what do you mean by that word when you say it? I know what I mean, what I think you mean, but I want to check that what I think you mean is what you actually mean. And you can iron out a lot of like landmines, because when you continue without doing that, you lay a landmine that you're going to step on later on at some point in the conversation. And sometimes very good sophists will do that on purpose. You know, they know that they'll plant landmines for later in the conversation. And I put a on one of the previous videos, I put the iReader.tv 3-part course on dealing with sophists who do this kind of thing. It's a really good course, so I would go back into and check that out. iReader.tv is a link. I'll chuck that in the chat actually, just to remind people. iReader.tv, you can go there and you can find their 3-video course. It's free. You don't even have to log in or anything. You can just watch it on their website, and it's probably about 5 or 6 hours in total. And it teaches you how to deal with sophists, people who try and trip you up and trick you in conversations and discussions. And it boils down to teaching you how to deal with bullies, basically verbal bullies and intellectual bullies, and bullies who they enter into a conversation with you, but they don't come from a good faith position. They're not there to have a win-win situation where we both increase our understanding and come away not enlightened, but we come away better off than when we went in, right? Some people come at you with a totally different attitude, but they can hide it, and they can seem like they're interested and they can seem like they want a discussion and a conversation, but they don't. And this course tells you how to identify that when people are being disingenuous and how to deal with it. And it's a really good framework for viewing conversations and interactions. So that is a little punt, a little shilling. Intellectual self-defense is the tab you want to go to. And in fact, you don't even have to go there. I'm just going to put it in the chat because I'm taking away your excuses. Grab that link, bookmark it, if you want to learn how to deal with sophists and intellectual bullies. That is a really good resource, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. But that's a framework for dealing with the kind of people who worm around with wriggle around with different meanings and interpretations of words, and they know you mean a certain thing, but they'll read it on a different level or read something into what you say when you clearly didn't intend it, and then accuse you of meaning that. And it's a whole, it's just a mess when people get into that stuff. And the key is to identify very quickly who's operating with good faith and who isn't. And when you identify it, then you do something about it. Cool. So no more silly word games, you bloody communists. Stop messing around with the truth. All right, let's get on with the next one. Anti-Coviet says, so many people think they're smart because they watch Newsnight and read The Guardian. Yes, The Guardian. I don't even have anything to say about The Guardian. At this point, people who are really into mainstream media of any description are, it's very hard to engage with them because they're voluntarily allowing propagandists and mind control into their view and their worldview of things. And they're hooked on it. And that is always going to be more powerful than anything you can do or say in a face-to-face interaction. That hypnotic 30 or 40 minutes or an hour at 6 o'clock every night, with the bong or the apocalyptic rave music that comes on at the start of the news programs all the time. It's hypnotic, and it's such a powerful weapon that the people who are hooked on it are going to be very hard to reach with any kind of logic or evidence or arguments or messages. The best thing you could do for them is to go around their house and take a sledgehammer to their television set. But I haven't had the balls to do that to anybody yet. But I have thought about it a few times, like, well, what would they do? How long would they tolerate not having a TV? And would they go and get a new one that day? Would they shout at me? I don't know. It's an experiment that I have thought I'd like to try, to just go and like take a hammer to the plasma screen and just be like, well, what are you going to do? Like, I'm doing you a favor here. You might not see it yet, but I'm doing you a favor. Maybe just chuck some books on the coffee table and then walk out. Oh, we got Heidi on Rumble. Good evening, Heidi. Hope you're doing well. You're very welcome. And I appreciate you dropping by with a comment. And I hope your signal remains strong because we've got a bit more to read tonight. Oh, I can't take credit for the apocalyptic rave music joke. That is Bill Bailey. If you look up Bill Bailey, one of his early comedy sets, he was making fun of the BBC News theme, and he kind of recreates it on his synthesizers. It's very hilarious. So I won't take credit for that one, but it's so on point though, because that's what it sounds like. Boop, ding, 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 ding. It's like, yeah, it's mental. I can't believe anyone sits through that stuff and tolerates it, because they talk to you like, the tone of the presenters as well is so, like, I don't know. The tone of everybody on TV is like they're talking to children. That's what I feel like. I feel like I'm being talked to like a child when I watch that stuff. Lickspittle. Thank you, Celine Lyon, who says, mainstream media journalism is now defined as lickspittle. Oh, Anti-Coviet says, Bill Bailey and Park Troll. That's it. That's the one. And he also did the song about, he did a fantastic song in there about a woman leaving him. That I can't even remember the name of the song. And I'm not even going to sing it, but that's a really hilarious one. That whole special actually is very good. I feel like he went off the boil a bit as his fame, like most, artists and comedians and actors or whatever. As the fame goes up, they the quality goes down, let's say, because they got to appeal to more people, which means you have to pitch it at a level that is closer to the average, if that makes sense. So when you want to get a big audience, you need to pitch it at the level of the bang average intellect and intelligence and awareness, right? So Bill Bailey started off as being a very out there kind of hilarious comedic act, but then his career took off, and so he had to tone it down and make it more idiot proof. Oh, and Anti-Coviet says Bill Bailey supports Starmer, so that is he is now dead to me officially, which is a shame because his early stuff, Pot Troll, was really good. Black Books, that was good, and his appearance on Spaced with Simon Pegg. Simon Pegg's in like Mission Impossible and Star Trek now, isn't he? But his sitcom Spaced, season 1 and season 2, that has some classic moments in it as well. All right, anyway, we're getting way off topic here, so let's get back on topic. So this one is this is a little longer. It's a 4-page one, but it's all about UNICEF, and I'm sure many people in this audience, if you're familiar with Sheep Farm, they do. Apparently, I haven't checked these out, but I've been told that they do excellent deep dives into the Huxley family. Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, whose brother, Julian Huxley, was a raving, rabid eugenicist and the founder and first president of UNESCO, and wrote a book about UNESCO, its purpose and philosophy. And in that book, he says, well, we need to be more, eugenicist, basically. So, UNESCO. Yeah, actually, I've just realized that this is UNICEF, which is a different thing to UNESCO. I'm rambling about UNESCO, and actually we're going to read about UNICEF. But they're not the same thing, but they are interrelated and overlapping, I'm sure. So UNICEF. Anybody know in the chat know what that acronym stands for? It's going to be United Nations something, isn't it? Because I know the UNESCO is all about education and young people. So UNICEF, I think, is about, let's see. Oh, UNICEF is for every child. About UNICEF. Oh no, my screen just went funny. So it's the world's largest provider of injections. There you go. That's all you need to know, isn't it, really? Hang on. I'll put that on screen so you know I'm not just making it up. So that's all you need to know about UNICEF right there. I didn't find out what it stands for, but they are the world's largest provider. Child health, nutrition, water, sanitation, quality education. Oh yes, I'm sure it is. Prevention of HIV, and the protection of children and adolescents from violence. So it's a children organization by the sounds of it. Yes, improving the lives of children and their families with injections. And equality. Injections and equality. They've got a mandate. They got all sorts of stuff on their website. I'm just trying to find out what does it stand for? Oh, here it is. Anti-Covius. Got it. United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. That's UNESCO. I'm on about UNICEF. UN International Emergency Fund. Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice one. What would I do without you? So they're going to the toughest places on earth, and they're injecting the most disadvantaged children. Which I shouldn't laugh about. It's dark. I'm just, it's a case of laugh or cry with this kind of stuff, isn't it? All right. So that's UNICEF. We're going to learn about UNICEF and its funding in this next little reading. And we've got Harry in the YouTube chat. Good evening, Harry. Telling us that a United Nations report criticised the UK for a rise in racist hate speech, particularly from politicians and public figures. This report was part of a 4-year review by the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. A Turkish academic highlighted the connection between political rhetoric and recent disturbances in the UK. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go back to the book cam and read about UNICEF. So this is the same author again, and the same kind of format as the previous ones, where we've got a quote here and then his sort of correction and his comments underneath. So the truth about UNICEF. Announced in February at the Men's Wear Retailers of America show, the UNICEF Father's Day tie program originated with Castle Neckwear Company of Los Angeles. Don Barron of Castle Neckwear hopes that the tie idea will mature into another annual source of needed funds for UNICEF. Correction. A humanitarian concern for the welfare of children is a noble sentiment, but we doubt if the Castle Neckwear Company, DuPont, the Men's Wear Retailers of America, or any good American would seek to channel such concern through the United Nations Children's Fund if they realized how UNICEF funds have repeatedly been used to aid the international communist conspiracy. Consider the facts. And we'll just say that's it there. Yeah, the United Nations Children's Fund. And they've just chucked an E in there, I suppose, for good measure. Maybe it's United Nations something Children's something Fund. International Children's, maybe it's something like International Children Extermination Fund. It's just a silent E, so they don't mention what E stands for, but it actually is exterminate, I think. Okay, consider the facts. The very first chairman of the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, it's emergent, that's what the E stands for, sorry, not extermination, my bad, was Ludwig Rachman, a communist from Soviet-controlled Poland. When he was subpoenaed in 1957 by the Senate Judiciary Committee to answer questions about his connections with communist agent Alger Hiss, Rachman fled this country rather than appear before the committee. In late 1952, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee published a 434-page document entitled Activities of United States Citizens Employed by the United Nations, in which it exposed, quote, infiltration into the UN of an overwhelmingly large group of disloyal US citizens, many of whom are closely associated with the international communist movement. Their positions at the time we subpoenaed them were ones of trust and responsibility in the UN Secretariat and in its specialized agencies, end quote. And if you remember, Ed Griffin talked about the Secretariat being the nucleus, the brain in the UN, where the decisions are made, where the power is really held, and where there is least accountability and visibility into who's in there and what they're doing. So, quite significant. One such subversive was a woman named Ruth Crawford, a publications officer for UNICEF. She declared under oath that she had been a member of the Communist Party and was still in sympathy with it. There was Joyce Campbell, who admitted that she had been employed by the American Committee for Yugoslav Relief, an officially cited Communist Front organization, and that it was because of her position with said Communist Front that she was able to obtain her job with UNICEF. The communist permeation of UNICEF helps to explain the many strange ways this charitable organization spends its money. As the McGraw-Edison Company's Committee for Public Affairs pointed out in December of 1961, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund appropriated $59 million between 1947 and 1958 to communist countries. The assistance does not go to the needy, but is administered through governments, end quote. And as any student of history can tell you, food and medicine are used by the communists as political weapons. Witness the planned starvation of 10 million Ukrainians in the 30s, and the communists' brutal use of UNRRA supplies in the late 40s in Poland, as described by Ambassador Arthur Bliss Lane in his book, I Saw Poland Betrayed. Do you remember the shameful UN operation in Katanga in 1961, when hospitals were bombed and civilians were indiscriminately killed? Well, UNICEF helped finance it. We quote from M. Stanton Evans in the Indianapolis News for January the 26th, 1962. Quote, when the UN was out of money for its Congo aggression, it borrowed $10 million earmarked for UNICEF from the US government. This was UNICEF money handed over with UNICEF's express consent. In short, UNICEF monies were used to subsidize the Katanga aggression, end quote. Consider also the part UNICEF played in pushing China off a cliff and into the hands of Mao Zedong and his communists. In 1957, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee published an affidavit by the Reverend Gerard M. McKernan, a Roman Catholic priest who had lived in Shanghai from 1949 to July 1954. A portion of Father McKernan's statement follows, quote, Mr. William Burgess held up delivery of UNICEF supplies until communist attack on Shanghai was imminent, then turned over all supplies to the SFER, the official communist welfare group of Shanghai. At a general meeting of all welfare groups called by Chow Enlai and held in Peiping, spring 1951, Chow Enlai stated at one of the sessions that the party must do something for Mr. Burgess because of the help he had given the Communist Party welfare efforts in Shanghai. End quote. Father McKernan is not the only priest who has criticized UNICEF. In 1962, the editors of an important national Catholic weekly, The Wanderer, prepared a study of UNICEF in which they noted, quote, as for Catholic spokesmen who in recent years have taken a stand against participating in UNICEF trick-or-treating only a few weeks ago, we wrote to Edward J. Goebel, Milwaukee Archdiocese Superintendent of Schools, asking him whether Milwaukee schools still do not participate in the UNICEF Halloween program. And, if not, would he please state his reasons? Goebbels' reply, dated September 8, 1962, follows. He writes, quote, our opposition to the UNICEF organization was based on the protest of several of our former Catholic Army chaplains who maintain that UNICEF proceeds were not contributed to youth in need, but rather that they were taken up by the communists in the communist-controlled countries. In short, UNICEF supports the communist policy of submit or starve. And UNICEF has again and again served as a cover for Soviet espionage. For instance, J. Edgar Hoover reported in 1966 that Vadim Isakov, a Soviet agent, attempted to procure from an American electronics firm, quote, certain missile tracking components which could not be shipped to the Soviet Union under Commerce Department regulations, end quote. When he was caught, it was discovered that Comrade Isakov was on the payroll of UNICEF. Who knows how many such efforts have gone undetected? Of course, UNICEF is financially responsible. Note the following from National Review for June the 14th, 1966. Quote, 20 million cents will permit UNICEF to occupy quarters on the 6th floor of the swank United Nations Plaza instead of the unspeakable 2nd floor. Yes, last week UNICEF was offered the 2nd floor, identical in layout to the 6th, except for some additional space. It's a saving over 5 years of $150,000 to $200,000, plus a large contribution from a New York company that wanted to rent the 6th floor. The executive director, touring in Africa, telegraphed to the real estate agents that under no circumstances would he accept second-story space, but insisted on the 6th. So, since Alcoa, the building owner, had a moral agreement with the UN, that was that. Again and again, UNICEF claims that for 1 penny it can provide 5 glasses of milk. By such figures, its fancy quarters alone are depriving the world's needy children of 100 million glasses of milk. Consider also how adept UNICEF is at squandering money in its everyday operations. G. Edward Griffin includes an excellent illustration of this in his valuable book, The Fearful Master, where he has observed, quote, UNICEF received $1 for 2 teachers' manuals advertised in one of its promotional pamphlets. It sent not only the manuals, but a large box containing hundreds of expensively printed brochures glorifying the purposes and accomplishments of UNICEF. This unrequested and unwanted material was shipped first-class airmail at a total postage cost of $10.40. According to UN statistics, this could have purchased 5,200 glasses of milk, end quote. In 1909, Lenin declared emphatically that Marxism is materialism. It is relentlessly hostile to religion. And in 1957, Nikita Khrushchev declared, quote, we consider that belief in God contradicts our communist outlook. Communists are militant atheists. Yet, in the face of communism's consistently hostile attitude toward Christianity, UNICEF regularly chooses communists to design its Christmas cards. Pablo Picasso, perhaps the best known of all the artists chosen by UNICEF, designed a card for them in 1961. The following year, he received the Lenin Peace Prize from a spiritually sensitive soul in Moscow named Nikita Khrushchev. Did you know that Picasso has belonged to the French Communist Party since 1944? And that the December 1966 issue of the Communist New World Review praises him as a lifelong communist. Consider also some of Picasso's stablemates. Hans Erni, artist of 2 UNICEF cards in 1957, was refused admission to the United States in 1950 because of his communist activities. Ben Shahn, artist of a 1958 UNICEF card, has been connected with at least 21 officially cited Communist Front organizations. Antonio Frasconi, artist of another 1958 UNICEF card, was a signer of the Artists' Front to Win the War, an officially cited Communist front. Doris Lee, a 1959 and 1960 UNICEF card artist, has affiliated with at least 4 officially cited Communist fronts and is so pro-communist that she signed a statement requesting US aid for the Soviet Union and for Red China. Arnold Blanche, artist of 1962 and 63, excuse me a second, I'll retake that one. Arnold Blanche, artist of 1962 and 1963 UNICEF cards, has also been connected with at least 4 officially cited Communist Front organizations, and he has regularly contributed cartoons and illustrations to communist publications. Karol Svolinsky, artist of a 1963 UNICEF card, is a Czech communist. In 1966, Lajos Vince, a writer and artist from Communist Hungary, did artwork for some of the cards, while the biggest and most expensive card in the 1966 line was a painting by a French artist named Jean Lercat, identified by the House Committee on Un-American Activities as, quote, reportedly a member of the French Communist Party and an active member in numerous Communist Front organizations. Small wonder that Florence Fowler Lyons wrote in her column for September the 11th, 1966, quote, the Communist Party bookshop in Los Angeles has just informed me that soon they will receive their annual supply of UNICEF greeting cards. One regrets to observe that UNICEF's consistent service to the international communist conspiracy is to be expected since it is an integral part of the United Nations. The fact is that the United Nations has, since the day of its inception, functioned as an important part of the communist drive to destroy American sovereignty in favor of world government. One of the best illustrations of communist control of the United Nations is that the post of Undersecretary for Political and Security Council Affairs, a post which Trygve Lie, the first UN Secretary General, described in his memoirs as the most important assistant secretaryship, has always been held by a communist. Small wonder, then, that the Los Angeles Times for April the 7th, 1970 reported UN Secretary General U Tant's admission that the UN reflects the ideals of communist Nikolai Lenin. Tant said openly that Lenin's, quote, ideals of peace and peaceful coexistence are in line with the aims of the UN Charter. Lenin's concept of peace amounted to submission by the free world to the chains of international communism. Certainly, UNICEF has done more than its share to promote the achievement of Lenin's goal. That is a little bit about UNICEF. So not only are they bombing around the world, injecting the most vulnerable children, but they're also spreading communism and money laundering by the sounds of it. One of the things that stood out to me from that little reading there is a reminder and a repeating of that quote from Ed Griffin about how the highly polished and well-produced magazine propaganda came through the post to the school. And I think it would be quite fascinating to learn about all these foundations and charities and organizations, how much of their money goes on marketing and advertising and drumming up support and gathering donations versus how much of it actually gets spent on, glasses of milk or clean water or whatever it is that they claim to be providing to the world's needy. And it would be good to know the true figures on that. Because in that example, it sounds like a lot of money was going on providing high quality, polished, glossy printed magazine propaganda. Make sure that's in schools so that we can keep the money coming in and the donations flowing. But then also the admission that UNICEF allowed its money to go to the UN for the Operation Rum Punch, the suppression of the Katangese secession efforts in Elizabethville. It just shows you that, yes, okay, there's UNESCO, there's UNICEF, there's UN, there's WHO. It's really all just one organization. Because if they can say, oh yeah, you take that 10 million and use it for your thing that you need to do over there, it's one organization, isn't it? It's not like UNICEF was like, no, we're going to keep this money and, spend it on injecting children. They were like, yeah, you take that money and give it to Ethiopians to go and murder those Red Cross workers. That's fine. So, just craziness. We got Heidi over on Rumble saying UNICEF targets children worldwide. UNESCO targets our natural sites of exceptional beauty, our cultural sites, and the folk heritage in every country. It's like national parks funding, sticky funding. Oh, thank you for that clarity. Yeah. Yes, UNESCO. So UNESCO do the kind of world heritage sites, and they claim to protect these sites for everybody in the world, blah, 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 blah. And then UNICEF is out there going after the children and the young ones. Jam Hashwish just dropped in to say hi. Got lots of episodes to catch up on. Enjoy catching up, and good luck. I know sometimes we're pumping out like 9 hours of content a week, so don't feel too bad. It won't go anywhere. Take your time to catch up. We got Adam here as well. Good evening. Good evening. So over on YouTube, Rosemary's here. Anyone got a rocket to go to another planet? I want to leave and live with the aliens. Frank Lennon says their walk came down, but their HQ still stands. Their wall came down, but their HQ, yeah. So that's the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall came down, but what's it called? The UNESCO, the UN headquarters is in the shape of the Arthur C. Clarke 2001 Space Odyssey thing. You know what I'm talking about. The one that makes the monkeys kill each other. Gwen says, do they still do Christmas cards? I don't know. That's worth looking into. On their website, it has a donate button. And let's see if it says anything about postcards. I didn't know that Picasso was a communist. But it doesn't surprise me. I always got the sense that Picasso's art was pushed in the same way that like brutalism is pushed in architecture to demoralize, to bring people down, to lower their vibration, if you like that kind of new age terminology. But it's like there to oppress. It's not there to make you feel good. It's not something you look at and you go, yeah, that's a beautiful, stunning thing. It lifts me up in my heart, my soul, my sense of beauty, my understanding of the ratio, the golden ratio, or the Fibonacci sequence. None of that. It's like ugly. It's crude. It looks like a child drew it. Maybe a disabled child or something who could probably do better than Picasso, actually. That's harsh on the disabled children. So, but I always felt like he was pushed, and art is subjective largely, but this is just my feeling on it. I don't look at a Picasso and see what the big deal is, but yet they're sold and collected for crazy crazy amounts of money, right? And I feel like that is an artificial thing. Like these paintings are bought and sold for exorbitant amounts of money, so that we look at it and we go, oh, well, we must be stupid then, because we can't understand why that's so valuable and precious. And it's a way to kind of demoralize and demotivate and make you feel dumb and make you feel like you're uncultured and that art is beyond or above your understanding and you just don't get it, right? That's kind of my interpretation of Picasso anyway. ESP has never heard of brutalism in architecture before. Oh, well, you're in for a treat. Just spend a few hours scrolling through brutalist architecture and, try not to kill yourself at the end of it, because it's grim stuff. It's just horrible architecture. And you see more, I think we see more and more of it coming in our cities and our new builds. They're always, they're never beautiful. They're never built to inspire and uplift the human soul. They're always very plain and imposing and just ugly. Ugly is the only word I can really say to go with it. But yeah, have a look, scroll through some pictures, let me know what you think. Gwen says Picasso's early work was very traditional. So by traditional, I'm reading like he actually painted things that existed and made them look like they look in reality, landscapes and bowls of fruit and that sort of thing. And Fuego says art is one of the largest sources of money laundering. I can definitely believe that for sure. Frank Lennon says the crazy money has less to do with Picasso, but all to do with limited supply. Okay. Yeah, so they're rare. There's not going to be any more of them, and so it's valuable because it's so so limited. You can't. But people could paint similar stuff and make it look like, it's not like, I don't know, like, have you ever seen, Caravaggio or something? You'd be hard pressed to recreate a Caravaggio painting with his contrast and use of light. It'd be very, very hard, in my opinion. I'm just guessing. I don't paint, so I have no idea. Picasso, I kind of feel like you could probably whack out something that looks like a Picasso after a couple of weeks, maybe, practice, I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. Anticoviat went to a brutalist school and says it looked like a factory. Yeah. ESP says it so makes sense. I really do think architecture is used as a way to bring people down on a subconscious level maybe, or maybe on a conscious level even. When I was in Manchester City Centre today, and there's some incredibly beautiful, old, stunning buildings there. Incredible. You look at it and you think, where did that society go? Where did that culture go? I want to live in that culture and that society who was knocking those buildings up. There's a fruit merchant's building, and it's not even in the center. It's a bit further other ways out. It's surrounded by car parks. I forget the name on it. It's John something. It's like John Smith's Fruit Merchant from like 1903 or something like that. And it's a stunning building. That dude's just selling fruit. Nowadays they make these buildings to kind of, they're imposing, they make you uncomfortable, they're always a bit lopsided, they look like they might fall over, a lot of them look like glitches, like graphical glitches. So if you play computer games, every now and again there'll be a glitch and something will go wrong, and a polygon will get stuck in a wall and there'll be a funny angle. A lot of modern buildings look like glitches, electronic like graphics card errors. It's like a glitch in the Matrix or something. Gwen saying something happened and Picasso changed his style of painting. I wonder what that was. I wonder if that coincides with his involvement with communism or not. I don't know. Anyway, good discussions tonight. I appreciate everybody leaving comments and contributing. It's really great when people do that, and hopefully nice that some people are here learning new things. That's always a bonus as well. So let's get into the main event next. Celine Lyon says, and we still vote for these cretins? Some of us do. I don't know how many people watching this do, but when I say us, I mean some of the people who live in this country with me. Some of us. All right, let's read a bit more of 46 Angry Men. So remember, there was the sort of declaration at the start of the book naming, there was a preface, an appeal to world opinion. This is the president of the Belgian Senate. Then we had a letter to the president of the Central Committee of the International Red Cross, listing out all the names of the people who were killed and listing a list of 14 violations that they are accusing the UNO of at this event. And then all the doctors who signed this, I didn't read all their names out, but there they are. There's the first 9 at the bottom. And then going up to 41. All government workers, university workers, most of them. And then the last few on this page. And so the part we got to was reading about these different accounts of the murders, right? So that list of violations, top of the list is murders. And I think they're going to work through each violation one by one and give their account of what happened and their evidence, right? So we're still working our way through this account of all these different murders. So that's why it's very hard and heavy reading. But as I said at the start of the broadcast, I think it's important to get it on the record and just reflect on what these kind of organizations lead to. What has to be done to establish this new world order, this one world government, this top-down technocratic system of control. What people are going to have to be stamped on. Necks are going to be broken. Doors are going to be kicked down because there'll be resistance to it because people in their heart of heart don't want it. And we know we can get demoralized and we can talk about like the sheeple and the normies and this kind of stuff. But when push comes to shove, when the door gets kicked down or when the computer says no at some really important, meaningful time and they are not allowed into the supermarket for something that they posted on Twitter the night before, for example, because the facial recognition says, no, you can't let that extremist in here. That will be unsafe for the other shoppers. They'll realize at that point that they don't want it. So whether or not the normies and the sheeple know it, they're on our side and we're on their side. And in fact, we are really, really on their side. Do you know what I mean? That didn't make sense. What I mean is like we are driven to learn about and know this stuff because we care so much about everybody, not just ourselves. It's not like we are getting a kick out of this kind of research and this learning that we're doing, right? It's like it's not always uplifting, and I do my best to keep it a kind of engaging, positive, upbeat tone, but it is heavy going, and this next reading will be as well, and so it's just worth kind of reminding ourselves why we pay attention to these kind of things and these events. It's because we care about the people around us. This and communism is sold to us about caring about the greater good. It's like, you got to be a communist because that means you care about the greater good. No. That's the fake version of caring about the greater good. The real version of caring about the greater good is getting educated, getting a clear and deep understanding of history and what went on before, and trying to communicate that to other people and explain the danger of allowing these sort of things to happen again, because they will happen again, because history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, as they say. And this is the purview of the maniacs in charge. The phrase we came up with was, let me see if I can get it right. There's like 4 parts to it. It was philanthropathic, brutalitarian, useless elites. Right? I think that phrase encapsulates exactly what it is that we're up against. Philanthropathic, brutalitarian, useless elites. That gets it. That really communicates it all. I'm really happy with that phrase. And we're we are actually trying to do what is right for the greater good by raising our own awareness of these crimes and these organizations and the things they're involved in and their true nature, not what they tell us in their glossy magazines and their brochures and their, their children's books, but what they actually do in reality, the real world effects and the people who are affected by this, the people who are no longer with us, who didn't go on to have children, perhaps, whose lives were cut short and who weren't able to grow to a ripe old age when they deserved to, because they were out there doing good things, giving up their time and sacrificing their own comfort in order to do good things for the people who were worse off than them. So we're doing our bit for the greater good in a real and meaningful way, rather than the fake way, which is, digital control of everything you do all the time. So bear that in mind as we go through this next bit, which is going to be kind of heavy going. So, and this picture is kind of grim. So we'll just read through the article. We'll just read through the account first, and we'll show the picture a little bit, but I won't dwell on it for too long because it is a grim one. And yes, great quote there, Anticoviat. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. And that is Orwell, I think. Okay, 7. On December the 15th, 1961, Mr. Guy de Decken, 40-year-old Belgian, taking advantage of a lull in the district of Uvira Square, leaves the house of his cousin, Mr. Sheridan Smith, who had sheltered him. He goes to his car, which contains a fair amount of personal belongings, takes out an English novel. His suspicion is aroused by a movement behind him, and he runs for the house, leaving the door of his car open. He was seen shot at short distance by an Ethiopian mercenary, by a bullet which passed under his right shoulder in the direction of his heart. 2 days later, the body of Mr. D. Decken is picked up, his book within reaching distance of him. In the meantime, most probably during the night, the left arm had been cut to the bone from the shoulder to the elbow by a knife or a sharp machete. The Baluba cannibals who have taken part in the looting are accused of this. Result: without being warned and without plausible motive, a peaceful European civilian is killed by an Ethiopian mercenary. The picture underneath is one of this shoulder cut to the bone. And I'm not going to show it. And just because it's really gruesome and I don't feel comfortable looking at it. And I think the description is bad enough, On December the 15th, 1961, Mr. Guy Stutterheim, 30-year-old Belgian, and Mr. Mark Boignies, 38-year-old Belgian, agents of the Safricas, after having fetched supplies, decide to remain together in the flat of the former at the Residence Rose, an apartment block situated at the corner of the Boulevard Astrid and the Avenue Lepley. Most of the other neighbours had taken shelter in other districts. It is 2 p.m. In view of possible danger, a friend rings them up, advising them not to remain there. They tell him that they prefer to stay in the flat, and owing to their presence, thus avoid a possible looting of the building. At 5 p.m., the same person rings them up once more, but instead of hearing the voice of his friend, he hears an uproar of very excited people who seem to be angry, speaking a completely unknown language, screaming, and making a terrible noise. What has happened in the meantime? The advance avenue by avenue and house by house of a UNO battalion with the insignias India I CR Mercenaries of 1st Gurkha Regiment. They have invaded the Residence Rose, discovered its occupants, and have taken them prisoner. Undoubtedly taking them for mercenaries or snipers, they make them undergo a severe questioning with blows given with the fist, rifle butts, sticks or truncheons, and also kicks. Mr. Stutterheim, who most probably tried to defend himself, has his wrists tied together. And finally, not having been able to get the information they hoped from these two peaceful civilians, they assassinate Mr. Stuttenheim by shooting 2 bullets in his mouth and Mr. Bugnes with a bullet in his heart. Annoyed and encumbered with these 2 bodies, the Gurkhas try to conceal their crime. In the evening, in a small garden bordering on the Boulevard Astrid to the right and behind a large rose bush, they dig 2 shallow and close-fitting graves where they deposit the bodies of their victims shrouded in sheets, covered them with earth, and carefully replace the pieces of the lawn at almost perfectly level with the rest of the lawn. The grass has grown and nothing can be seen, to such an extent that gardeners cut the lawn of this patch at the end of January without noticing anything whatsoever. But things take another turn. A police dog of the Swedish section of the UNO stops dead in front of the rosebush and gives the alarm. On the occasion of a roundup brought about by the Medical Corps and the Red Cross of Katanga. After the second spadeful, dug without much conviction, Mr. Borgny's shoe appears. A particularly heinous crime, grave maltreatment, assassination, and willful dissimulation of the evidence. No more is required to send the culprits to the gallows in England or to the electric chair in the United States. 9. On December the 16th, 1961. The triple and particularly heinous assassination of 3 elderly people brought immortal glory to the UNO. Well before dawn, trucks of the UNO transporting Ethiopian troops head for a path which follows high-tension power cables. The villa of Mr. Derricks, head of the Union Minieri, is situated about 100 meters from this path. One usually reaches it by the Avenue de Rue, which after a little bridge over the Lubumbashi becomes a small private road. The second boy of Mr. Derricks, Mr. Andre Kapenga, a witness, relates that nothing special occurred until 1:45 p.m. At this moment, the old cook, Mr. John Fimbo, has just brought coffee into the drawing room, and Mr. Guillaume Derricks, 60-year-old Belgian, and his elderly mother, aged 87, who lives with him, are about to drink it. At that moment, an armoured car of the UNO takes up position on the path alongside the high-tension cables and is machine gunning the other side of the valley of the Lubumbashi. When the firing has ceased, Ethiopian mercenaries enter the garden from the direction of Les Roches and machine gun the 2 cars parked in the garage. And this picture is the victims here, Mr. Guillaume Derricks and his aged mother, 87 years old. And that was there, a picture of them heading out to Katanga. The boy, Andre Kapenga, is panic-stricken. He locks himself in the food store next to the kitchen. The Ethiopians climb the stairs leading from the garage to the kitchen and with a burst of machine gun fire shoot Mr. Jean Fimbo, who has sought refuge under sink, a series of bullets crosswise from the shoulder to the opposite thigh. Enter the drawing room where Mr. Derricks, who cries out in English, "Not me," is shot down by a bullet found later in the region of the spleen and is finished off by a burst which blows off half of his face and skull. A few seconds later, a third burst hits Mrs. Derricks in the right breast. The bullet comes out through her left side and in the neck, sectioning the carotid arteries, the trachea, and the esophagus. At about 5 p.m., the boy Kapenga hears the soldiers once more entering the villa, where they run about looting to a slight extent before leaving. Soon after, Mr. Kapenga ventures out of his hiding place and, horrified at the sight of the 3 bodies, runs away and hides himself in a loft. The next morning, on hearing the chauffeur of Mr. Derricks, he comes down and leaves with him. Dr. Fouillat and Mr. De Welf, who had come with bread for the Derricks family, discover the carnage and give the alarm. Result: 2 elderly European civilians, sympathetically known for their generosity, and an old, faithful Katangan servant with 30 years' service, are savagely assassinated by Ethiopian hirelings of the UNO. The elderly Mrs. Derricks was obviously the prototype of the mercenaries which the contingents of the UNO may boast of having slain. And if you missed the last reading, just to point out that they've all, except for that story we just read about the Gurkha troops, they've all been Ethiopian. The UNO troops that have been engaging in these murders. 10. On December the 18th, 1961. While driving a Jeep on the Munama Road with two American newspaper reporters, Mr. Favre, civil servant, Swiss, age 33, without being warned, is shot by a rocket from a bazooka manned by Swedish mercenaries of the UNO. The newspaper reporters were only wounded and taken to the UNO hospital. Another big mistake, very embarrassing for the UNO, who defend themselves by pretending that all Jeeps are automatically considered as being enemy military vehicles, which must be put out of action before they can do any more damage. Result: one unarmed European assassinated by the Swedish hirelings without plausible motive and without being warned. So that's the first time we've heard Swedish hirelings carrying out this kind of murder. 11. On December the 19th, 1961. Mr. Alazraki, 30-year-old Belgian settler, accompanied by his mother-in-law, Mrs. Waters Sodain, is driving along the Avenue des Usines in his car in order to fetch bread at the bakery temporarily set up in the Union Miniere. At the crossroads formed by the Avenue Lubumbashi, the Avenue du Parc, and the Avenue du Radium, without any warning, his car is machine-gunned by a gang of Ethiopians in ambush behind the school bus shelter. Mrs. Waters is slightly wounded in the leg, while Mr. Alazraki has a broken thigh with a fracture of the bone. He manages, however, to turn and to stop his car between two residential blocks while fleeing towards a neighbouring house. Mrs. Waters hears the Ethiopian hirelings finishing off her son-in-law. He's assassinated by a bullet fired at point-blank range into the top of his skull. By crawling and dragging his fractured thigh, Mr. Alazraki was trying to seek shelter behind a dog's kennel. Soon after, a car driven by Mr. Pierre Kut, 40-year-old Belgian, accompanied by Mr. Jacques Drugmant, 38-year-old Belgian, and Mr. Georges Van de Put, 35-year-old Belgian, all three representatives of the Union Miniere and who were getting supplies of bread and paraffin oil from the improvised shop set up by their company, is machine-gunned at almost the same spot by the same gang of Ethiopian assassins, testimony of Mr. X, who watched the murder from the window of his house. Did they try to escape from their vehicle? Mr. X could not see what followed, as he himself had to seek shelter when the houses on the crossroads were in turn machine-gunned. In any case, it is by chance that the body of Mr. Drugmant was found the next day in a plot of the Avenue du Radium, where he managed to drag himself. He had an open fracture of the right instep, caused by a bullet. Another bullet had penetrated the right breast as far as his left hemiabdomen. Another bullet had gone through his left cheek, another through his left thigh, extracted during the autopsy, and two more had grazed his forehead and his neck. The body of Mr. Vanderput was to be found on December the 22nd, 1961, in the bypass canal of the Lubumbashi. He had been killed by a bullet in the heart and thrown into the canal by his murderers. That same day, the body of Mr. Cote was taken out of the Lubumbashi. He had an enormous opening made by a bullet in the front of the neck, causing the sectioning of the carotid arteries and the trachea, etc. Again, on December the 19th, at about the same time, a van of the BCK, driven by Mr. Eric de Rijker, agent of the BCK, 40-year-old Belgian, who was going to the Lubumbashi station, is fired upon at almost the same spot by the same Ethiopian mercenaries. Having been wounded by a bullet in the abdomen in the region of the caecum and finished off by a bullet in the left temple, Mr. de Rijker is thrown into the Lubumbashi Canal. Result: 5. Unarmed Europeans going about peaceful occupations are assassinated without plausible motive and without having been warned by the Ethiopian hirelings who robbed them of their wedding rings, their watches, their wallets and other belongings. 12. On December the 19th, 1961, the Irish Battalion makes an assault on the BCK camp situated at the angle made by Avenue de Luxembourg and Chaussée de Kassenga. An old worker, half-invalid, Mr. Sunda Kachikeke, maintained on the payroll by Pity and whose job it is to supervise the lavatories, is surprised alone in his maisonette. Panic-stricken, he loses his head and brandishes a knife in his trembling hand. He is shot. Result: a poor old man who could easily have been disarmed has been killed by the Irish. That's the first one we heard about the Irish assassinating somebody as well. But overwhelmingly, they've been Ethiopian hirelings who have been doing this stuff so far. Okay. Killed. General result for December 1961. Out of 141 bodies from the December events found up to February the 28th, 1962, 32 of those are Europeans, including 4 women, and 1 is that of a Goanese. Of these 32, only 2 were volunteers in the Katangese National Guard killed in uniform combat. Volunteers and not mercenaries, because these are settlers born or living for many years in Katanga, which has become their own country. Disgusted by the murders, looting, theft, and exactions of the UNO, they considered themselves in a state of legitimate defense, and enrolling without pay, they fought alongside their black Katangese compatriots to defend their menaced homes. None of them were soldiers by profession. Of the 30 European civilians, 6 were killed by mortars, the origin of which has not yet been established with certainty. 1 was seemingly killed by a stray bullet, 1 was probably shot in his car by a Swedish armed vehicle and carbonized, and 22 undoubtedly assassinated by the UNO soldiers. The list is not closed. Alas, 2 Europeans are still missing, and there is every reason to think they have also been massacred by the Ethiopians. 22 out of 30 civilians, that makes 73%, assassinated. 24 out of 32, that would make 75%. In other words, 3 crimes for every 4 civilians killed. The Goanese must alas be attributed to the Katangese soldiers, his Indian origin having made him suspect of espionage. 1 crime then, 1 only on the side of the Katangese. We regret it, but we regret still more the 22 UNO crimes. 1 crime by the forces of a nation said to be half civilized, and the 22 by the forces of an international organization formed to defend peace and civilization, with the following laurel leaves: 15 assassinations of Europeans by Ethiopians of the UNO, 6 by the UNO group supplied by India, and 1 by European UNO forces. Of 108 bodies of Katangese or Northern Rhodesians, 54 are those of soldiers and police killed in combat. Of the 54 civilians, 13, including 1 woman, were assassinated by the UNO mercenaries, 24%. So these are pictures from a UPI. This is December the 8th, 1961. A Katangese child killed by the Blue Helmets is buried under fire in the grounds of the Rhine Elizabeth Hospital. And the bottom picture here is the December the 5th, 1961, UNO declares war. First victims, these African refugees whose lorry received a direct hit from the Blue Helmets. And these 2 pictures are the ambulance, and the Europeans who attempted to evacuate the persons wounded in this odious attack were themselves constantly under fire from the mercenaries in blue helmets. General result of September. On September the 13th, 1961, the civilian telephone operator Emmanuel Kasamba was shot in front of his switchboard at the post office by the mercenaries of the UNO, who attacked and overran this strictly civilian building. That same day, Mr. Kestemont, agent of the Banque Belge d'Afrique, who out of curiosity, which was perhaps misplaced, had come to the corner of the Place de la Poste, was shot by the mercenaries of the UNO. The same morning, a jeep full of policemen who was passing at high speed to the left of the post office was fired upon by the UNO mercenaries. With burst tires and the driver having been hit, the jeep crashed into an electric post. The 4 wounded policemen were finished off one after the other on making the slightest movement. Evidence given by Dr. X back in Belgium, and who saw the slaughter and was able to photograph it. On September the 15th, 3 peaceful persons were shot without reason by snipers of the UNO, perched on the roof of the post office or on some other neighbouring buildings which they occupied. Mr. Kipilipili, agent of the Seven Seas Airlines, as he was passing in front of the police station on his bicycle. The student Muteba, a Red Cross Samaritan, while passing the corner of the crossroads formed by the Avenue Morio and the Avenue de Hemptine. Mr. Powis de Ten Bosch, Belgian official of the information service, while entering the Marucci bakery in order to buy some bread. These UNO snipers seem to have no other motive of this killing unexpectedly and without warning than to terrorize the civilian population by shooting at peaceful citizens, going about their daily occupations as though they were shooting at clay pipes at a fair. That is the end of the section of the people killed. I'll just pause there and have a look at some comments. It's really, really affecting to read these individual incidents one by one, and also to have quite, any low numbers. In other words, when you hear numbers in the hundreds of thousands or the millions, it's hard to process that. But when you hear like 43 people, you can imagine 43 people. You could probably name 43 people. You can't name 10,000 people or a million people or whatever, but you can name like 43 people, can't you? So this is about the level at which I think these kind of accounts are most affecting and most powerful, especially given their names, their age, little details about what they were doing, trying to help, trying to buy a bit of bread and some paraffin oil, for example, trying to even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or thinking, oh, well, if we stay here, that'll prevent anyone from looting the apartment. Or like that picture there of them trying to bury a child while still being under fire from the blue helmets. So it's very, very affecting, very powerful testimony, and I think it's written. And the other thing is how it's written in the present tense. Okay, with that, because usually you read narratives, it's actually written in the past tense. He got out of bed, he drank some coffee, he went to work. They've chosen to write this in probably the most effective way they possibly could have, in that you're watching it unfold in the present tense while driving a Jeep without being warned, is shot by a rocket. It's happening, in real time in your imagination as you're reading these accounts. So just incredible work. But I mean, to capture the gravitas of the situation and the pain and the suffering and the tragedy, I think they couldn't have done a better job, and then to throw the pictures in there as well. I did skip over some of the really gorier ones, but you get the sense from the description, I think. ESP says, it still engulfs me with rage when I see stuff like this. Yeah, that's completely the appropriate response to have. It really is. Heidi left a comment on Rumble saying, the greater good will always involve self-sacrifice, the one thing that most people turn away from. Consumerism is the inverse of self-sacrifice. Yeah. People don't want to give up their comforts, their creature comforts, their familiar things, the habits, the way they like to spend their time, the decisions they like to make, the routines and behaviors that they're so accustomed to. They don't like to change that. Be uncomfortable. How dare you suggest such a thing, Heidi? Me? Be uncomfortable? Do something I don't want to do? Yeah. But yeah, no, I think I'm in total agreement. Do things for other people, even if you don't like that person. That is one of the powerful things as well. LJ says, that's true, Nick. We all are powerful and they know it. That's right. Like, groups of people unified together underneath an understanding of reality that's based on truth, on a seeking and an earnest appreciation for truth. And even if you don't have every single detail of every single aspect of what's going on, it's about pursuing truth and seeking it and going after it and having the humility of being a learner and accepting that you're wrong about certain things and accepting that you'll make mistakes, and you got to adjust and course correct as new information comes in, and be discerning and try not to be led down the garden path, because there's a lot of that going on out there as well. But yeah, people have a lot of power and they know that. That's why they have to put so much effort and time and money and resources into disabling us of our critical thinking skills, of our moral behavior and our ability to do the right thing, our conscience, our creativity. All of this is under attack from so many different angles and so many different vectors, that the only reason for this full spectrum dominance attack upon us is because we have so much power and potential within us, every one of us, right? The all-encompassing nature of the matrix that we live in has to be that way because we are so inherently, we have so much potential inherent within us, right? So I agree. Ashley Styles says, think Swiss Knights Templars, of which the Order of the Garter is a subsect. Who has the Order of the Garter? The Windsors. And who holds their highest honor? Blair. Thank you for that. LJ says, nothing really surprises you anymore once you learn all this knowledge. You do get to that point, don't you? You're like, oh, of course. Like, oh, of course Picasso was a communist. That's why his paintings are shit. Ashley says, and to think when I served, I always wanted to wear a UN blue beret. Yeah. It is funny, isn't it, how these things change? But I think it's good that you're not clinging to that with a kind of religious devotion like many would. You're open to adjusting and changing your views, taking in new information and saying, okay, maybe that's not what I thought it was. Let's course correct here and reevaluate. Some people will take that in as a real a religious devotion thing that they will always believe in and always want to achieve forever, and regardless of what any information people will bring to them. Frank Lennon says, having come from our Republic of Ireland, a country which had to fight for its independence, and shooting someone in another country just doing the same thing, monumental hypocrisy. Yeah, it is. Well said. Celine Lyon says, exactly. If we all stopped giving corporates our money and invested in our local communities, that in itself would change everything. And Fuego says, that goes double for governments. Yeah, great points. I'm really digging you all being here, and I'm appreciating your thoughtful comments and your observations and you sharing them in the chat. It really does make this a very rewarding experience for me, at least. So let's crack on and do a little bit more. We've got maybe about another 40 minutes, maybe another half an hour or so. It's looking like we might not get through all of this, so we might come back and do another one on Thursday. But we'll see. Okay. So the section we're on to now is woundings. If we go back to the list of Violations, the top one was murder, and we've been through all those now. And then we're on to like injuries. Yeah, it's just more horrific stuff. But because sometimes, like, I mean, obviously murder is up there as one of the worst things. But, you know, if you die instantly, that can somehow be a mercy compared to if you end up in a sort of, you know, slow, long, laborious, drawn out, suffering type situation. My point is just that we might not have got through the worst bits yet, even though all that stuff we just read was pretty horrific. But anyway, let's see. So, woundings. Article 3 continued. The ambulance man, Mosi Sonder, in white coat and Red Cross armband, is machine gunned and seriously wounded in the right leg by UNO mercenaries in Place de la Poste whilst getting out of his ambulance to pick up wounded victims. His leg had to be amputated. Just monsters. All right, September 1961. During the fighting in September, 20 Katangan civilians and 9 European civilians were grievously wounded in Elizabethville, many of whom by the terrorist firing of the UNO snipers in ambush at the post office and in the neighbouring buildings. Here are some typical accounts. On September the 14th at 9 a.m., the ambulance man Moisi Sonder, dressed in white and wearing the Red Cross armlet, is machine gunned and badly wounded at his right leg by the mercenaries of the UNO. That's the picture we just saw on the other page. His leg had to be amputated. The same day at 2:30 p.m., a car driven by a European accompanied by his wife, their boy and his wife, are fired upon, without reason, according to witnesses. From the readout of the UNO hospital, the 2 women are wounded. On September the 20th, 1961, the head of the fire department of the BCK and his wife, while driving in his car not far from the club of the BCK, is without reason deliberately wounded by 2 bullets in the back, fired by an Irish mercenary standing at the crossroads of the Avenue de Sayo and the Avenue de l'Etoile. December 1961. On December the 22nd, the total number of wounded in Elizabethville was as follows: 401, including 179 Katangan soldiers and policemen, 174 Katangan civilians, and 48 European civilians. 20 had to be taken to hospital, 13 men and 7 women. All the wounded Katangans had to be taken to hospital. The percentage of civilians wounded is higher than that of the soldiers, 55%. Most of them were wounded by shrapnel from mortar shells or from stray bullets. Some of them, however, were deliberately wounded by the mercenaries of the UNO. We are giving here a few accounts of some misdeeds which are known to us and of which the testimony is certain. On December the 5th at 1:20 p.m., Mr. Pierre Hutin, agent of the UMHK, is going by car, an Opel Capitan, with Mrs. Adrienne Essen, agent of the Comelco, to her house, situated at number 2074 Avenue de Redjaf, opposite the future new hospital. She wishes to pick up some personal belongings. A barrage of Katanga soldiers has allowed them to pass but will not allow them to return as fighting has started. At 6 p.m. they are allowed to return to town along the Avenue de Redjaf and the Avenue Le Play. His suspicion aroused, Mr. Hutin drives very slowly. When, at about 200 metres from the crossroads of the Avenue Stanley and the Avenue Le Play, Indian mercenaries of the UNO open fire on the car, which partially turns over into a lateral ditch. The driver lies flat on his face on the floor of the Opel, and Mrs. Adrianassen on the seat. The car is still being machine gunned, the door being jammed, with the roof lamp alight. Mr. Hutin is finally hit in the heel. The calcaneum is shattered and the Achilles tendon torn. Mrs. Adrianassen is slightly wounded at her temple. Both of them remain crouched in the car without moving until the next morning at 8 a.m. when they are picked up by an ambulance which takes them to the Rhine Elizabeth Clinic. On December the 7th at 9 o'clock, while everything is quiet in the district and cars are moving about freely, Mrs. van Goitsenhoven, who is talking to two gentlemen in the garden of the house situated at number 2 Avenue, is wounded at the right shoulder by a bullet deliberately fired from the Fromont camp by a UNO mercenary. On December the 9th at about 3:30 p.m., Mrs. Sezels and her mother, Mrs. Segethi, living at number 1917 Avenue Stanley in the house of Dr. Sezels, hear a convoy of vehicles of the UNO forces approaching. As their house has already been machine-gunned 4 times the previous days by passing UNO convoys, they are suspicious, and the 2 ladies seek shelter in the corridor. This time, hand grenades are thrown against this house without any plausible reason other than the panic-stricken fear of imaginary mercenaries. Mrs. Sezels is wounded in the thigh by a piece of exploding hand grenade. On December the 12th at 5:30 p.m., Mrs. Weiss, having put on a very conspicuous yellow apron so that one can see that she is a woman, leaves her house at number 2223 Chaussée des Cassenga in order to ask for help from the Irishmen of the UNO billeted in the Spander farm. Raising her arms, she reaches the limit of her plot. An Irish mercenary deliberately fires at her from the nearby police camp about 50 meters away and wounds her with a bullet in her thigh. On December the 17th, 150 agents and members of their family have spent the previous night in the cellars of the head offices of Union Miniere, so as not to remain isolated in the surrounding districts and to protect themselves from mortar fire. They spend the day there, waiting to spend another night. It is Sunday, traditional day of truce for the hirelings in the Middle Ages, but we are in an age of manifest civilization. Consequently, at about 4 p.m., without any warning, 2 sabres of the UNO attack the head offices with rockets, passing 5 or 6 times over the building during a total period of from 3 to 5 minutes. Afterwards, 12 points of impact are found. By a miracle, no human lives are lost. However, 7 people are wounded by shrapnel from the missiles or by pieces of glass. Mr. and Mrs. Pletink, Mrs. de Medelier, and Mrs. Beauvant, Mr. Derrideau, Mr. Van Cote, and Mr. Lvoff. On December the 19th, Mrs. Waters Sadon, mother-in-law of Mr. Al-Azraqi, is wounded in her left knee by a bullet fired by an Ethiopian mercenary while she was on her way with her son-in-law to fetch some bread at the bakery of the Union Miniere. Her son-in-law is wounded and soon after is finished off by the Ethiopian hirelings. In the afternoon of the same day, 8 Ethiopian mercenaries enter the house of Mr. Pierre Beauchot, Avenue des Roches. He lives there with his wife and their 4 children. These looters search the house from top to bottom, striking him with the butts of their rifles, making him fall from the stairs. His right foot is fractured, and he is forced to walk 800 meters in this state to undergo a whimsical questioning. At 11:30 p.m., he is freed by Colonel Mitra. Objects of a total value of more than 120,000 francs were taken by the looters, and the remainder mostly ransacked. And the next section here is other violations. So, Article 27, women shall be especially protected against an attack on their honor, in particular against rape. In December 1961, we have been acquainted with 3 cases of rape committed by UNO mercenaries on European women. On December the 20th, 1961, 5 Ethiopian hirelings exact ransoms from the inhabitants of the Avenue B, enter the house of Mrs. B. 4 of them keep watch in the garden, while a 5th drags Mrs. B into the house and rapes her, medically certified soon after by Dr. C. On December the 24th, 1961, between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., 2 Irish hirelings enter a house in the Rue de C and successively rape Mrs. N and Mrs. A. Odious way of celebrating Christmas Eve. Article 31. No physical or moral coercions shall be exercised against protected persons. Under the heading of coercion, we include the arbitrary arrests and the forced internments. Article 43. Any protected person who has been interned shall be entitled to have such action reconsidered as soon as possible by an appropriate court. And Article 72. Accused persons shall have the right to be assisted by a qualified advocate or counsel, may call witnesses, etc. So I think these articles are all from the UNO, the United Nations Charter, right? Preliminary notes. We will not discuss the right of the UNO authorities in proceeding with the arrests and the expulsion of European officers, mercenaries, or alleged as such, and political advisors, or alleged as such. We will, however, make three remarks. 1. There is a way in which to proceed. That of the UNO, especially of the Swedish mercenaries, has too often been a slavish imitation of the methods worthy of the Gestapo of sinister memory. Armed arrests, brutalities, prohibition of taking more than a ridiculous amount of luggage, or of setting one's businesses in order, families abandoned. In one word, a lack of humanity and fair play which should be the characteristic of the UNO, even when proceeding with the most disagreeable tasks. And let us not forget that it concerned persons of whom the great majority were worthy, honest, and honourable people. 2. There is the arbitrary way, which was too often used when choosing the persons to be banned. 3. There is also the fact that as a whole, these officers and alleged political advisers played a moderating role towards the Katangan government authorities. Many difficulties would have been smoothed away without bloodshed if these persons had been maintained in office. In August and September, practically all the officers and political advisers, as well as a fair number of mercenaries, had been liquidated, often in the elegant way which we have related in the preceding notes. In December, at least 66 persons, whose names are listed below, were arbitrarily arrested by the UNO and detained against their will without being able to appeal to a magistrate or be legally assisted, and then reluctantly released. So Mr. Walter was released after 14 days. Mr. Requiles and his wife after 10 days. Mr. Slaypen after 7 days. Sartenair and Verplank, Messrs. Sartenair and Verplank after 6 days. Yeah, and this list just goes on, you can see. Some were transferred to Leopoldville first and released, and then some were transferred to Leopoldville and they don't even know if they were released or not. Commentaries. What plausible explanation can one find for so many arbitrary and mostly brutal arrests? We have only mentioned those which have been related to us. Alas, there are many more. 1. Sole explanation. The rage of the men of the UNO at not finding signs of the mercenaries which they had as mission to capture. This would justify their senseless action. Everything then becomes a pretext for arrest. The simple fact, more frequent than one may think, of having a card of reserve officer among one's identity papers, the fact of owning a sporting gun, the fact of owning a more effective weapon destined to protect oneself or to protect one's wife and children, or one's installation endangered by the looters and the Baluba murderers, the fact of having cartridges on one's grounds. But how can one prevent the Katangan soldiers from seeking shelter, even against one's will, behind a hedge, a little wall, the garage, or the house? But as there are cartridges, this evidently means that you have been firing. The truth is that in December, just as in September, at the start of the fighting, only Katangan forces without European officers were in the line. Later on, these troops were never commanded by European officers, but there was a reinforcement of about 30 mercenaries wearing the regular uniform of the Katangan army and operating as extremely mobile commandos. They were joined later on by 30 odd volunteers in uniform and who were recognizable at sight. Must one recall the heinous murder, in the first few hours of the fighting, of 4 unarmed and harmless Europeans, see above, or of their Katangan workmen? This was sufficient to justify those Europeans who volunteered and who, owing who, owing these murders, quite justly considered themselves as being in state of self-defense. It was a miracle that the great majority of the European population was able to keep its self-control and did not take up arms and fight to literally defend themselves. We may also add the strict orders which were given by the large companies in Elizabethville to their agents to stick to technical and professional activities and not to take up arms even to defend the valuable installations of their companies. Hundreds of houses were searched by the men of the UNO without result. Dozens of European civilians arrested and threatened with the foulest brutalities if they did not admit having helped, sheltered, or simply known mercenaries or volunteers. Houses searched without any result? Alas, not always. Failing to find mercenaries, which was perhaps dangerous, one fell back upon a nice little compensating looting, which is not so dangerous when one is alone to be armed. And if the house which was being visited was empty, an innocent little ransacking was included. An impartial inquiry would make known to an astounded world that the hirelings of the UNO have nothing to learn from those of the Middle Ages with regards to armed robberies, looting, and ransacking. Half of the cars in which the UNO mercenaries comfortably strut around are the fruits of theft. We will end this sad chapter by pointing out the arrests, typical of the manner of acting of the men of the UNO, of 3 bakers, an elegant way of complicating the food supplies of the civilian population and of increasing the panic. Article 33. No protected person may be punished for an offence he or she has not personally committed, are especially prohibited all measures of terrorism, pillage, and reprisals. Article 34. The taking of hostages is prohibited. 1. Systematic machine gunning of civilian buildings. September 1961. We had pointed out that in September already, motorized patrols and convoys of cars belonging to the UNO troops, when passing by, systematically fired on civilian houses which were situated on either side of the roads used by these convoys. Here is an example. On September the 18th at 10 p.m., a passing UNO convoy fires on all the houses situated on the Boulevard Rhine-Elizabeth and the Avenue Stanley, especially and with greater intensity on a house in the Avenue Stanley marked by a large Red Cross flag and in front of which 2 Red Cross ambulances are usually parked. December 1961. This kind of terrorism is used on an even greater scale. The convoys leaving the Claire Manoir in the direction of the UNO positions at the Cy Badouin roundabout, in the direction of the golf course and in the direction of the Lido, systematically machine gun the civilian houses on the outward as well as on the return journey, on pretext that they have to protect themselves from possible snipers. But as we have already said, there have never been any snipers. As for the regular commandos of the Katangan army, all one has to do is to think a little, and one will realize that 4 or 5 snipers would not be so foolish as to shoot, without hope of escape, on considerable UNO forces. Under this misleading pretext, and actually with an aim to terrorize, dozens of houses have thus been seriously damaged and are rendered uninhabitable, and the furniture badly damaged. Here, from among many others, is a very precise testimony which will serve as example. It was made by Dr. Sezels, who lives at number 1917 Avenue Stanley. His house is distinctly marked with a Red Cross sign, yet, as we have already mentioned elsewhere, the Red Cross sign is considered as an aggravating circumstance for the UNO hirelings. This house is occupied by the doctor, his wife, his mother-in-law, Mrs. Segazetti, age 79, and an Hungarian refugee, Mr. Paul Laurent. On December the 5th at 1:20 p.m., the whole of the Avenue Stanley is full of trucks and jeeps loaded with troops of the UNO who are going into the front line. The Indians are in the garden of plot number 1917. Dr. Sezel leaves his house and informs them that this plot belongs to a doctor. They seem to be very well behaved and even avoid trampling on the young rose bushes. They remain there for 1 hour. On December the 6th at about 11:30 a.m., a passing UNO convoy fires on the house as well as on all the other houses of the Avenue Stanley. At about 4:30 p.m., they fire again as they pass by. The Sezels family seeks shelter in the corridor. On December the 7th at about 12:30 a.m. and about 4:30 p.m., they fire again. On December the 8th at about 5:30 p.m. and about 7:20 p.m., they fire once more. On December the 9th at about 3:30 p.m., Mrs. Sezels and her mother are alone in their house. They hear a convoy approaching, and without hesitating, they take cover in the corridor. This time, hand grenades are thrown. Mr. Sezels is wounded at her right thigh. The two ladies go round the back and seek shelter in a neighbouring house. At about 4 p.m., the house is again intensively machine gunned. That's a picture of Seventh-day Adventist mission. From December the 10th onwards, the machine gunnings cease at last. Dr. Sezels counted on the outer and inner walls of his house 355 holes caused by the firing, 72 of which were in the bedroom and the office, 56 in the provision storage room, 50 in the facade of the dispensary, 21 in the dispensary and the consulting room, etc. All the windows and the blinds are broken, the furniture, the wireless, etc. is broken. Note: in 1948, Dr. Sezels had to flee from Hungary, leaving behind him his town flat, his country house, 125 acres of land. At the age of 50, he had to start again from scratch and was able to set up a new home in Katanga. At the age of 60, thanks to the UNO, his home is once more destroyed, and if he is not given justice, by what tribunal, he will once more be forced, at the age of 60, to start all over again. And what applies to him is all the more so for a great number of settlers established in Elizabethville for many years. Often 3 generations having been born in Katanga, they are not always people who have acquired very great fortunes, but enough to buy a house and to set up a small firm of artisans. The UNO has ruined them. The UNO, which benefits from an immunity which we continue to consider as immoral and contrary to natural law. Similar accounts have been given by a great many people, in particular by Messrs. Bouquet, Dooms and Dr. Defru, all 3 of whom had their houses machine-gunned by the UNO columns. And I think we will leave it there for today before we get on to hostage-taking. We're just over halfway through this now. Oh, hang on. We'll finish this chapter. There's only like 2.5 pages left, so we'll finish this chapter. The Taking of Hostages, September 1961. On September the 16th at 11:30 a.m., 4 Europeans were used as protective hostages. They were taken from the prefabricated Swedish camp on the Chaussée de Cassenga up to the headquarters of the UNO at the Clare Manoir on Avenue Fromont in a UNO truck bearing red crosses and which was full of ammunition and was guarded by 6 armed Swedish mercenaries. This truck was preceded and followed by an armoured car, these armoured cars being fired upon the Katangan gendarmerie. The Swedish guards forbade these 4 hostages to lie down so as to avoid the bullets. 3 times, according to the evidence of Mr. C., his Lordship Mr. Tombelaine, deputy of his Lordship Mr. O'Brien, went to the offices of the Sojilek in an armoured car of the UNO accompanied by 10 armed Indian mercenaries and several European protective hostages, including 1 woman. The usual manner of proceeding used by the UNO was to arrest at random a handful of Europeans, bring them to the Clare Manoir headquarters of the UNO, and to keep them there for several hours on pretext of some interrogation or other, then to release them with some vague excuses, while yet another batch of cornered Europeans were brought in. There were thus always some protective hostages at the Clare Manoir who were destined to be used as protective lightning conductors against the bombing of the headquarters by the small improvised bombers of the Katangan forces. Let us admire the Machiavellian hypocrisy of this process of successive hostages. December 1961, The arbitrary arrests, which we have previously mentioned, may in a certain way also be considered as a taking of hostages. 3. Breach of trust. One sec. Excuse me. Astounded at not being able to solidly support their argument of the large amount of pro-Katangan snipers and mercenaries which were spread all over the town, and which would partially have justified the attack of the UNO, the mercenaries of the UNO strained their ingenuity by trying to create out of nothing photographic perjuries. For example, arresting drivers at random, and while they are taken away for some interrogation or other, filling their luggage trunk with weapons and ammunition and then photographing it, then showing this load to these civilians, frightening them, and trying to obtain from them, in exchange for the promise that they would not be worried much longer, the names and addresses of mercenaries and volunteers which they knew. Here are 2 examples of specific cases. 1. The case of Mr. B. Mr. B is one of the 2 mercenaries which the UNO was able to get hold of. The day he was captured, he was wearing the regular uniform of the Katangan gendarme. The UNO mercenaries forced him to take off his uniform and to put on civilian clothing, which, by the way, did not fit him, and thus clad and wearing his weapons, photographed him as a sniper. 2. The case of Dr. V. On December the 20th at around 11:30 a.m., Dr. V goes to a house not far from the Clare Manoir, accompanied by the D family. He wants to recover a diathermic apparatus stored in the house of the latter. He goes to his Chevrolet, which moreover flies a Red Cross flag and has a Red Cross number plate. At about 11:45 a.m., he is arrested with his companions by an Indian major accompanied by an interpreter of Portuguese nationality. His papers are checked. He undergoes a long interrogation till he is released at about 3 p.m., but not before having signed a written statement mentioning the reason for his visit to the house of the D family. During his interrogation, the UNO mercenaries placed weapons in the boot of his Chevrolet, among others, a full machine gun. Photos were taken of all this under such an angle as to show up at the same time the insignias of the Red Cross. This most probably in order to discredit the doctors of Elizabethville. Dr. V immediately went to the Rhine Elizabeth Clinic in order to relate his mishap, and on his word of honor declared that he was transporting no weapons in his car. Moreover, would one logically go and throw oneself in the lion's den? In other words, in the immediate vicinity of the heavily guarded headquarters of the UNO with weapons in one's car, when everyone knows how dangerous it is to transport weapons in one's car and to be thus cornered by the men of the UNO. So, next section is bombardment of hospitals. We've got about another, I think, 20 pages or thereabouts. No, actually more than that. We've got another 40 pages to do. So we could probably get that done on the next one. But yeah, some more gripping stuff. Not quite as tragic and heavy as, the assassinations, but still very. It's war, isn't it? And war is always just unspeakable. But the deeper tragedy of this is that it was absolutely avoidable. It did not have to happen this way at all. And like he was just saying there that the doctors were saying, a lot of the people who were getting taken in as hostages were people who could have smoothed things out and helped come to a peaceful resolution. But that's not what they wanted. That's not what the people, the thugs, the brutes, the criminals, the scum who went in there and perpetrated these crimes, that's not what they wanted. Some people are just animals, and it's disgraceful and very sad that we have people among us who are order followers, who are violent sociopaths and psychopaths, and they get off on treating other human beings this way. It's incredibly sad and upsetting, especially when they're from our country, or at least our area or our region or our culture. It's very just tough to face. But I think an important thing to face that we do have, monsters among us, and we do have to be vigilant and wary and able to face that fact and recognize that it's not all just sunshine and roses and everyone's good really on the inside. It's like, no, there's some dangerous animals out there, and they will be looking for opportunities to satisfy their impulses. It seems like a lot of them ended up joining the UN. It would be very interesting to know more about the recruitment process and how people are selected and how you get into this kind of role, because it sounds to me like they just got a lot of thugs off the street, gave them machine guns and sent them over to Katanga. Did they get any training? But I do also recognize that, remember the numbers that went in, there were thousands of people going in. So how many would it take? How many of them were bad eggs? How many of them were looting and pillaging and raping and doing all this horrific stuff versus the full number that went in there? How many were disciplined and didn't engage in this kind of thing? It's important to try and bear that in mind as well. It wouldn't have been every single UN soldier, but certainly there was a lot of bad apples in that particular contingent by the sounds of it. And you wonder if they've been received some sort of nod, or it doesn't matter if you do a bit of looting and pillaging while you're there, don't worry about it, wink wink. I don't know. I don't know how all these things work, you see, so this is why just a lot of questions. So I'm just going to have a sip, I'll review the comments, and then we'll wrap it. ESB hanging in there over on Odyssey saying, not changed much. No, this kind of things are still going on all over the place, right? Heidi says, not important, but Reine, Queen Elizabeth rhymes with Zen in French. Look up French Foreign Legion sometime. Okay, thank you. I will do that. Ren Elizabeth? Is that what you're saying? Is that how it's pronounced? Ren, Queen? I don't know. The Rumble comment confused me there. But thank you, Heidi, for letting me know about that. Okay, over on YouTube, what's going down? Irish mercenary, says Frank Lennon. Yeah, they get, I think hirelings is the best word that they use to describe these people. The hirelings, they're thugs, they're order following scum is what they are. Like, give me some money and I'll do whatever. And I'll, commit some looting and pillaging and whatever I want along the way as well. Rosemary points out that Tedros is from Ethiopia, which is a very good point. Tedros, the fearless leader of the WHO. Yes. And isn't he accused of some sort of horrific crimes there as well in his home country? I believe that is the case. I don't know how valid those accusations are, but certainly something shady and fishy going on in his background, without a doubt. Anti-Corviet says, the only good thing councils do is empty our bins. That is right. That's pretty much all the council does around my end. They put on a few events, We had a rubber duck race recently in the river, and they have a parade event every year. They get some singers and put up a tent and close off the town centre, so it's all, you can't drive through it, and everyone gets drunk, sings songs from World War II. Frank Lennon says, I'm 100% sickened by this. I doubt very much if any of this came out in the Irish media at the time. Yeah, I know. I totally agree. I'd like to know what kind of footprint it made, and if this is easy to dig up. Obviously I wasn't around at the time. It's the first I've heard of it reading this book. Okay. And Fuego, Larkin Rose's book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, really sums up the root problem from which this all originates. Yes, which is the belief that there are some beings who have rights that you do not have, and that you can give those human beings the rights that you do not have. So let's say you don't have the right to take away 20% of somebody's income, and call it tax. If you do not have that right, how can you give that right to a group of human beings calling themselves government? You can't. You can't give someone something that you don't have yourself, right? It doesn't make sense. It's incoherent. And believing that through this mechanism of authority, that some human beings have rights that others don't. I think the best case for that is children. Children and adults, they kind of have a different thing going on. Children need a lot more structure, and the adults are responsible for the children and bringing them up and putting rules in place and being in control of them in a meaningful way to help them, survive, to become adults. But other than that, like between adults, you don't have any more rights than another adult does. But, this group of adults got together, called themselves government, and suddenly they've got all these rights. And they say, well, just because we have the authority. And you're like, well, what's authority? Don't worry about what authority is. Just believe in it. And hence, that's the most dangerous superstition. But yeah, you're right. It's a fantastic book. Locke and Rose nailed it with that book. It's extremely... it's a small book. You can read it in an afternoon, but it's very well written. It's very lucid, coherent, makes sense, and it's just packed full of good quotes. And it's very hard to argue with the stuff he lays out. Ashley Stiles says, I spent 2 months as a mercenary in Iraq. The mindset of the ex-army was shocking. I asked, so what's the contact drills? They asked, will there be chance to get some action? Oh. I lasted 2 months, hated it, and demanded to be flown home. Right. I don't think I would survive very long in that situation. I don't even think I'd last 2 months. I'd be like 2 days. I'd be like, I got to get out of here. Gwen says, Birmingham Council is threatening to permanently close the libraries. Well, that is terrible, but you might get some cheap books out of it. So, if they're going to go ahead with it, find out what they're going to do with the books. Maybe they'll be giving them away. They might just have come down and take what you want because we're shutting the library. You might get some good stuff. You and a bunch of friends, maybe. That's where my mind goes immediately. I'm like, get down there and rescue the books. Ashley says, they have to keep libraries open for computer access for job seekers. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, so... But they could just get rid of the books and keep the computers. Alrighty. I think we're about time to wrap up. Yeah, incredible. Really glad that we have this, that we've got a copy of this and we can read it, and it's preserved, and just powerful testimony. And I think it would be hard to get to read this and view the UN in the same way that you did before you read it. I want to know more now, since the last 60 years. What has the UN been up to? What has it been involved in? Anything else similar along these lines? Any other events, occasions where thugs were given free rein to terrorize innocent people in such a way? Or did they correct themselves? Did they say, right, that was a catastrophe, and they did something to, never happen, make sure it didn't happen again? I don't know. I'd be interested to find out what went on in the intervening 60 years. But yeah, we're gonna have to come back and finish this off. We can't leave this unfinished. And I'll give a little teaser for the next session. The other thing we've got 2 options for the next session. We'll finish this off. And then there's 2 things I quite wanted to read as well from this pack. One is congressional comments on the UN. So this one is all, it's like commentary on the UN by members of Congress. Remember in the book, Ed Griffin says, you've heard all the pro-UN comments from American politicians, but did you know this bunch of politicians over here criticized it and said we should leave it? No, you probably didn't. So I thought that would be a good one to read, the congressional comments on the UN. It's quite dense, though. I don't think we'll get all that. Look at that. It's like a proper newspaper. Maybe you could read through 1 or 2 of those. So that's one that I thought would be good. And then the other one I thought might be good is this, which is by Gary Allen, It's called Get Us Out. The UN Threatens the United States. And if you don't know Gary Allen, he wrote this book, which is None Dare Call It Conspiracy, which is a really good book. Very, very good, like, conspiracy text to start with, I'd say. It's not super well referenced, but it is pretty solid. Mark Passio rates this book very highly. And some recommending reading on the back, including Tragedy and Hope, Federal Reserve Conspiracy, Anthony Sutton. These Larry Abraham books I've never read. I'm not sure about those two. But one about mind control down here as well. So Gary Allen wrote this book, and he's also done I guess it's a leaflet or an article or something here called Get Us Out. I thought that would be a good one to read as well. So we could do some sections perhaps of those two, and then we will finish off 46 Angry Men. And that, I think, I'll put that back after. That'll probably wrap us up for our Fearful Master book reading series, I think. So let's wrap it there. Thank you all very much for being here. If you've been on catching up taking part in the live chats over on Rumble, YouTube, and Odyssey. We've got Entropy as well. There is a chat on Entropy, but I never look at it. I don't think we get a lot of people watching on Entropy, but there's four places that you can get involved and chat. But Rumble, YouTube, and Odyssey are the main ones. So thank you to everyone who's there. Gwen, Ashley, Celine Lyon, LJ, Rosemary, Enfuego, Frank, Anticoviat. Fantastic. We had Johnny here earlier on. Lovely jubbly. I really appreciate you guys showing up. And it's lovely that we can all, help each other along this learning journey. ESP over on Odyssey. And we got Turbs, CS Mally 369, Jam Hashwish, and Heidi over on Rumble as well. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very much. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to help get the numbers up. I love watching numbers go up. And, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If you want to look at ways to support, want to find my social media presence, all the links are on there. If you want to send me some crypto, the addresses are on there. It all is appreciated. Adam as well. I forgot to give you a shout out, but thank you for taking part and being here too. Allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. The link is pinned to the top of the chats, so I don't even need to sit here and keep repeating it, to be honest, do I? You all know where it is by now. And if you are interested with the recent developments where the founder, CEO of Telegram has been arrested, we might be seeing more censorship of platforms and apps and these kind of things. So please continue please consider joining the mailing list. You can shoot me an email, autonomoususername@gmail.com, and I'll add you to the mailing list. And then in case Telegram goes down or channel gets nuked or something, I can shoot you a message and just say, hey, here I am, I'm over here. And we will keep on with what we're doing, regardless of what the tech overlords try and do to us. I'm working on setting up a place where we can meet and have a good bit of security and privacy and reliability, and not have to, suckle at the teat of the big tech master overlords type criminals who do what they do. But that's just in their nature, isn't it? So have faith and have heart and have belief in yourself and the people around you and your power to influence their lives positively and to come up with creative solutions and to change your behaviors. A lot of the time we feel trapped and we feel like we can't change and we can't do the things that we need to do to get out of a rut or to get a ball rolling in a certain direction or to change course or change direction. And on a grand scale, in terms of the society and the way history is going, it is kind of a glacial type thing that we're probably not going to be able to change it. But individually and in small groups, we can change our behaviors and our routines and our experiences to a more oriented to more freedom, more peace, more kindness, compassion, more decency, more moral behavior to, ourselves first and then to other people. And I think that can be done on an individual level, a small scale, where you are, start where you're at. And that's a noble, worthwhile thing to do. And don't get too hung up on the tragic slow motion car crash shit show that is the modern era, you know. So that's my final parting word for you all. Thank you again for being here. I will see you on Thursday, finishing off this booklet, and I will look forward to it. So enjoy your Wednesday and enjoy your Thursday, and I'll see you Thursday night. So take it easy and God bless.